Romantic Tales. Chapter 181. Even so, he shouldn't use that woman like that. His frowned. He didn't say anything, but in his heart he had long regarded Hellion Vivian as his own younger sister, the kind of younger sister with brotherly affection. He had never seen such a woman. Too many things had happened to her. Even if it was a man, it was very likely that he would be unable to recover from this setback. But she was so free and easy, as if she could face anything she encountered. Her personality was good and she was very gentle, especially when treating the elderly. His knew that she obviously didn't have a gentle personality, but she would always take care of people. She had a sense of balance when interacting with people, making people feel very comfortable. It was no wonder that the people in the shop worshipped her like an idol, regardless of gender. However, it was because of this person that her family and power were taken away and she was driven out by the Hellion family. Without the support of the power behind her, it was more convenient to use her. He didn't deny that when he first came into contact with Hellion Vivian, he also wanted to use her to achieve the effect of protecting the person at the top of his heart. After all, the situation in the capital was very unstable. There were some secrets that the people of the four great families didn't want to let the imperial court, and even the successors like them, know. These secrets made his uneasy, which was why he changed his attitude in recent years. But ever since he truly met Hellion Vivian, he didn't have the thought of sacrificing another person to protect one person. After all, he wasn't a member of the imperial family, so he didn't have to go to that extent. It was just that the person he liked had no interest in him at all. She also didn't care who he would marry in the future. That was why he repeatedly tried to get close to Hellion Vivian, wanting that person to regret it in the future. But when he did these actions, he was sure that even if someone really came to cause trouble for Weiwei, he would be able to deal with it. As he cherished this friend. As for what the third prince was thinking, he had no way of knowing. If the other party really chose Hellion Vivian to be his consort in order to protect the servant girl who was once very important to him, then no matter what happened in the future, Hellion Vivian would have to shoulder it by herself. The competition in the imperial palace was even more fierce than in the family. In addition, the current empress was not the third prince's biological mother, and the emperor was always obsessed with women. Once Hellion Vivian entered the palace, she would be like a piece of fish, waiting to be cut up. The third prince chose this third princess consort so that she could replace the woman at the bottom of his heart to block these knives. How could Hellion Vivian have it easy? After all, the third prince's thoughts were too deep. It was hard to say why he was doing this. In addition, the news he received when he returned to the capital recently was also related to that maid. Soon this news would spread to the capital. At that time, what would the third prince do? It seemed that when he arrived at the hidden spirit temple, he had to find an opportunity to have a good talk with that woman and have her stay a bit further away from the third prince. It would be best if she didn't involve herself in this relationship of endless benefits. Haze didn't know that Hellion Vivian was already involved, and that everything she did was voluntary. Because of Hellion Vivian's identity, she was destined to be involved in this relationship of benefits. She definitely wouldn't stay out of harm's way. If she wanted to take back the Hellion family, she first had to stand on equal footing with the four great clans. Because what she had to face was not only those traitors of the Hellion family, but also the Su family, who had extraordinary influence in the court. Creek. At dusk, the wheels rolled through the last section of the journey to the hidden spirit temple. This section of the mountain road was very rugged. In addition, there were many trees on the mountain, so it wasn't very convenient to walk. Hellion Vivian didn't open her eyes, but saw that Qin Wenwan, who was sitting across from her, had already woken up. Sitting across from her, Qin Wenwan looked at her with her eyes wide open. Seeing that she was awake, a smile appeared on her face. "Younger sister, you finally left. The road ahead seems to be blocked. The guards are at the fork in the road." In this kind of weather, it's indeed easy for something to happen. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips into a smile that wasn't a smile. In all likelihood, this road blockage was also man-made. Qin Wenwan used a handkerchief to wipe the water stains by the window. "Younger sister is right. We have to be a bit more careful. If the road ahead is really blocked, I reckon that in a moment we'll have to walk all the way over." And Hellion Vivian indifferently responded. As if it wasn't easy, Qin Wenwan asked one more sentence. "Younger sister seems to be very close with young Master He." "It's all right." Hellion Vivian smiled. Qin Wenwan lowered her eyes and wiped the window again. "Younger sister is truly blessed. Don't talk about me. Elder Sister Chen really guessed correctly. We have to walk the next section of the road up the mountain. As Hellion Vivian spoke, she lifted the curtain of the carriage and strolled out. It was still raining outside. In front, the young ladies of the great clans had already received the news from the guards on horseback. One by one they walked down from the carriage, their maidservants holding umbrellas as they stood to the side and waited. Hellion Vivian and the others were more or less at the end of the group. After waiting for them to come down, they began to move forward again. However, this time they switched to walking. From afar, Hellion Vivian could see a tall and straight figure standing in the middle of a group of people, untainted by the wind and dust. Hellion Vivian was puzzled. It was raining so heavily, yet not a single drop of water had splashed onto his body. As she thought of this, Hellion Vivian looked towards Heizei, whose black hair was already wet. She saw that raindrops were dripping down from his forehead. And this was a normal situation. That person from the royal family was too abnormal. As if he had noticed her gaze, that person actually turned his face to look in her direction. She didn't know if it was because he was holding an umbrella or because it was raining, but that pair of eyes that were as deep as a pool of bones were deeper and colder than ever. It was as if not a trace of warmth could be melted into them. Just by looking at her like that, he was so cold that it made her teeth ache. Hellion Vivian was stunned. What was going on? She didn't provoke him, right? However, even if he was as unreachable as a god, there were still people who would worry about his safety. Eunuch's son was the best example. Your Highness, the road ahead is too slippery. Please watch your step. Hellion Vivian looked at the continuously shouting eunuch and shook her head. She thought that with the royal family's degree of misophobia, even if you didn't remind him, he would still be very careful. Is there money on the ground? You didn't even raise your head when looking at it. When the cold voice sounded in her ears, Hellion Vivian always had the illusion that she was in the North Pole. Your Highness. Why did this man run to the back of the group? Hellion Vivian furrowed her willowy eyebrows. Beligaju looked at her coldly, the corners of his mouth pulled up in an arc that couldn't be considered a smile. Who else did you think it was? Hellion Vivian. She didn't think it was anyone. Do you often forget to bring your brain when you go out? Beligaju glanced at her empty hand, his eyes indifferent. Hellion Vivian. After not seeing him for a few days, this man's poisonous tongue was becoming more and more undisguised. Wait a minute, he came here specifically to mock her intelligence. Chapter 182. Just as Hellion Vivian was thinking, an incomparably soft fox fur cloak covered her from the top of her head, carrying a special scent of mint and sandalwood. Wearing it was very warm and comfortable. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her shapely eyebrows. This kind of action could easily attract other people's sidelong glances. At this time, letting those noble young ladies set their eyes on her wasn't a good thing. She didn't believe that third prince didn't understand this logic. Hellion Vivian opened her mouth and was just about to refuse. She heard Beligaju's indifferent voice announce, "Continue to walk forward. Those without umbrellas go to Eunuch's son's place to get a windbreaker. Don't delay the time." The hidden meaning of these words was clearly blaming Hellion Vivian for slowing down their journey. Just a moment ago, Hellion Jiao Air's eyes still exuded poison, flashed with a complacent smiling expression. With the maid holding the umbrella, she slowly curved her thin lips. Very good, they still haven't arrived at the hidden spirit temple, yet third prince already started to become impatient with that slut. Wait until they arrive at the hidden spirit temple. Once the plan is carried out, His Highness will even more regard her as a poisonous woman. The other people also had expressions of schadenfreude. I laugh and continue to walk forward. No one actually went to get a windbreaker. Basically, everyone understood third prince's meaning. Even if His Highness spoke indifferently and politely, it was still difficult to conceal the disdain he had for Hellion Vivian. Only Eunuch's son didn't think this way. He just stood to one side and swallowed his saliva with all his might. That fox fur cloak wasn't Master's favorite clothing. Last year, young Master Lai left a handprint on it and was almost beaten into a pig's head by Master. But now His Highness unexpectedly gave this cloak to a woman. Eunuch's son almost suspected that his own presbyopia had worsened. Or was it that retired emperor recently gave him too much pressure, and he dreamt that His Highness finally opened his eyes? My ass. Even if he opened his eyes, it still couldn't be this Miss Hellion. That would mean that he had to change from one nightmare to another. Moreover, when did His Highness let him prepare a cloak for everyone? He didn't have anything here. Eunuch's son roared in his heart, but there was a smile on his face. However, when he came back to his senses, he found that his master had already walked far away. He hurriedly took the umbrella and followed. Hellion Vivian didn't care what Beligaju thought, but she wasn't stupid. The current situation was much better than before, and she could enjoy the warmth of the cloak with peace of mind. I wonder how much the third prince's cape would fetch if I were to sell it. Last time his handkerchief was sold for 10,000 taels of silver. This cloak was worth at least 10 times more. Return it to me after you're done. As if he saw through what she was thinking, the man's incomparably bewitching voice once again sounded from beside her ear. If I find out again that something that should be here with you has appeared in the market, whoever buys it from you, I will make that person close the door. He spoke the last few words very slowly, so slow that Hellion Vivian felt her scalp go numb. Only then did that slightly cold and indifferent voice go far away. His whole body was solitary and handsome. No matter when he looked at it, he was perfect to the point that he didn't have any flaws. Hellion Vivian secretly dispelled the idea of selling the item. If the third prince threatened that if she sold this cloak he would make her look good, Hellion Vivian would completely ignore these words. If he threatened, then he threatened. She, the Queen of Arms, wasn't someone to be trifled with. But the man said that whoever bought her cloak would have that person close the door. This kind of two-faced method, how did he think of it? Hellion Vivian felt that she couldn't compare to the third prince in terms of shamelessness. Since she couldn't sell it, then she'd take it for herself. In any case, this cloak felt pretty good. Your Highness. Shadow quietly appeared behind Beligaju. He knelt down on one knee on the rainy ground. His whole body was dressed in black. Your Highness guessed correctly. There's a problem with this broken piece of wood. Beligaju's eyes flashed. Standing with his back against the light and under the setting sun, he was like a character who walked out of a manga. At this moment, his body was no longer indifferent and elegant. Instead, it was filled with a thick and heavy murderous aura. Protect the retired emperor well. Today no one is allowed to enter the temple. Otherwise, kill without mercy. Yes. Shadow lowered his eyes and his figure once again disappeared. Originally, if they took a carriage, they would only need the time it takes to burn a stick of incense to reach the temple. But without the carriage, coupled with the fact that it had rained and the mountain was slippery, no matter how organized they were, by the time they reached the top of the mountain, the sky was already hazy and dark. Fortunately, the rain finally stopped. The imperial bodyguard who was leading the way ran over and was just about to knock on the door. Just as he was about to knock on the door, he heard a thick and old voice from inside. Amitabha. Lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot. I didn't know that there was a distinguished guest coming. Sorry for not coming out to meet you. Sorry for not coming out to meet you. That voice was deep and distant with an indescribable tranquility, making it easy for people who heard it to lay down their hearts and return to nature. The imperial bodyguard looked left and right. He could only hear the voice but could not see the person. Unable to open the door, he was so anxious that his forehead was covered in sweat. Beligaju casually walked over. His eyes fell on the imperial bodyguard's waist. His voice was indifferent. Take away the knife. The royal is still the most intelligent and thoughtful. As soon as he finished speaking, the wooden door slowly opened. An old man in his 60s stood there with white hands. He had a white beard and white eyebrows, wearing a Buddhist robe. He was the temple's abbot. He fiddled with his Buddhist beads and laughed. This old monk knew that the retired emperor was coming and had already prepared a vegetarian meal behind the temple. How about letting this disciple of mine lead the retired emperor over first? This old monk and the royal family haven't seen each other for many days. I still want to ask the royal family for advice on some Buddhist teachings. Basically, almost the entire Dragon War Empire knew about the grudge between the royal family and the Shaolin Temple. The situation was like this. That year, this temple's abbot was still a hedonistic young master who had not converted to Buddhism. He infiltrated the beggar sects, 3 major sects, and became the leader of the entire capital. Beating anyone up was a matter of minutes, yet he fell into the hands of a little boy. Speaking of this matter, the temple's abbot was also unlucky. At that time, he mistook the third prince for some family's young master and kidnapped him to the mountain. Then they were beaten up. How could there be such a child in this world? No matter how powerful he was, he should have counterattacked on the spot. That way they would not have been wiped out in one fell swoop. Even now, whenever Abbot Feng Zhang thought of a certain person's words at that time, he would gnash his teeth in anger. What did he mean by being kidnapped is also quite interesting. Did they look like toys? Did they? Since that day they were swept clean by the soldiers. At that time Abbot Feng Zhang found out that the little boy was none other than the world-famous third prince. Regarding this, Abbot Feng Zhang suffered a blow. Every time he did something, his purpose was to defeat this genius highness, including his conversion to Buddhism, because all the martial arts in the world were from the Shaolin Temple. This rumor was already not a secret in the capital. Therefore, as soon as Abbot Feng Zhang's words fell, everyone's line of sight turned towards Baligaju. He merely brushed away the non-existent dust on his fingertips and absent-mindedly said, "Want to find me to compete? Ask for advice on Buddhist teachings." Abbot Feng Zhang's expression didn't change as he corrected his words. Bailey Jiaju grunted and faintly smiled like a demon. "Then forget it, I don't understand Buddhist teachings." Abbot Feng Zhang quickly opened his mouth. "It's a competition. A competition." "Oh." Bailey Jiaju lazily yawned. "It's cold on the mountain, I don't feel like moving." Abbot Feng Zhang. "Then you still want to compete with me? Are you playing with me?" It turned out to be the retired emperor who had already finished his vegetarian meal. Behind him were several assisting ministers and womenfolk. The overly familiar figure made Hellion Vivian clench her fists one by one. That figure was standing among the accompanying womenfolk. She was wearing a pure white long dress embroidered with lotus flowers, a jade pendant of safety hanging in front of her chest. Her long hair was tied up into a flower. One hand was twirling sparkling and translucent Buddhist beads, the other hand was on a maid's arm. She slowly walked over. Her appearance was well maintained. She was clearly already in her 30s, but she looked like she was only in her early 20s. That year she had relied on this kind of otherworldly and delicate appearance to capture the heart of that scumbag of a father. Xianemo. The name she would never forget in this lifetime. At that time her mother was already at the end of her life. Her chest was gasping for air and her body was deteriorating day by day. However, she was still dignified in front of others. Even if she was terminally ill, she never lost face in front of Su Yenemo. It was only when she felt that she couldn't take it anymore that she made a request to Helian Guangyao, asking him to be lenient to her daughter on account of their relationship as husband and wife for more than 10 years. Her mother had never begged anyone in her life. However, at the last moment she begged someone for hurt. Hellion Vivian had already forgotten what the scene was at that time. Her memory seemed to have been stimulated by something and became a little fuzzy. She only remembered that woman bringing her maid to the side room and mocking her mother word by word. "Sister, don't be silly. What do you think you can do by holding on like this? So what if you're more powerful and talented than me? Your husband still chose me in the end. That's why I say everyone has their own fate. Don't fight with the heavens. In the end, the one to suffer is also you." Hellion Vivian closed her eyes tightly. When she opened them again, her pupils had already become clear. It was ridiculous when she thought about it. When the Su family spread rumors about her mother being rude, why didn't they think about what their own family had done? She had a child with a married man before she was even married. Her family was broken and her family was dead. Such a big hatred. Until now she had finally seen the culprit of all this. Hellion Vivian slowly let go of her hand and restrained her anger. She returned to her calm and indifferent appearance. However, when the official with the surname Liang heard the words of the retired emperor, his expression changed instantly. He knelt on the ground and anxiously explained, "My daughter is young and did not mean it. Please forgive her, retired emperor." The retired emperor smiled and waved his hand. He looked very amiable and did not show any anger. However, when he said the next sentence, the young lady of the Liang family also changed her expression. "If you are not satisfied, you can go down the mountain. There is no such thing as a crime." "Minister Liang, you are too serious." Minister Liang wiped the sweat on his forehead and did not dare to get up. "Yes, what you said is right. It is better to be quiet in the temple." After the retired emperor said this, he continued to lead the officials forward. He had no intention of letting the official with the surname Liang get up. The young lady of the Liang family was stunned. She really did not expect that because of her words she would fall into this situation. Was this the legendary emperor's prestige? She did not understand, but it did not mean that the accompanying officials did not understand. During this period of time the Liang family was too favored. They were too favored and became arrogant. The retired emperor was not like the emperor. He was very clear-minded. This time, in addition to praying for blessings, he also wanted to take the opportunity to see the character of these young ladies. Since the first one to stand out was the young lady of the Liang family, he had to suppress her. It would also prevent others from having thoughts that they should not have. Chapter 184. Using both kindness and severity was the method of a ruler since ancient times. Hellion Vivian saw this scene but didn't say anything. She only curved her lips. This trip to the hidden spirit temple wouldn't be as peaceful as the retired emperor had hoped. Eldest Mississippi Hellion Vivian was just about to enter the side room to eat when she was stopped in her tracks by an outstanding-looking servant girl. That servant girl was none other than Su Yenmo's personal servant girl, Xiaolian, who served her all year round. She slowly walked towards Hellion Vivian. She was wearing a light pink long dress with satin on the outside. Although it couldn't be considered very beautiful, it revealed the amorous feelings that had been cultivated over many years. She was only a servant girl, but she ate and used better than her, a true member of the Hellion bloodline. Eldest Miss, Madam knew that you were driven out of the family and was upset. She didn't have much money on her, so she ordered this servant to bring you some jewelry. Madam said that you're about to get married and need these things. She was worthy of being Madam Sue's head servant girl. Her eyes were obviously hiding disdain, but every word was appropriate. Hellion Vivian didn't immediately take the jewelry bag in her hand. She only curved her lips into a smile and seemed to be indifferent. How many years have you been in the Defense Division's residence? Xiaolian obviously didn't expect her to ask this kind of question. She was only slightly stunned and then answered, "This servant has been in the Defense Division's residence for almost 8 years. Wasn't it 8 years? When she was 7 years old, her mother passed away. The Defense Division's residence changed owners and Madame Su took power. Although she was still alive, she was raised to be a good-for-nothing. She looked on helplessly as there was enmity that couldn't be avenged, injustice that couldn't be heard. So it turned out that 8 years had already passed." Hellion Vivian took a deep breath. It was as if she could feel a slight chill in her breath. The more it was like this, the more harmless her smile became. "I'll accept these accessories. When I go back, I'll tell Madame Su that I, Hellion Vivian, thank her for taking care of me all these years." Xiaolian wrinkled her eyebrows as she watched Hellion Vivian's departing figure. She felt that the other party's words just now had a hidden meaning behind them. However, after carefully thinking about how this trash had handled matters previously, Xiaolian felt relieved. It wasn't that she hadn't heard of it before and had also heard of Hellion Vivian's recent deeds. However, no matter how formidable she was, she still hadn't made any progress in the area of handling matters. This kind of character that didn't care about the consequences of others was the easiest to fall for other people's tricks. No matter how she looked at it, she only had some martial talent and didn't have the slightest bit of other things. Such a little girl dared to make things difficult for Miss Jiao Er. She was simply acting recklessly. In the past, Madame had disdained to deal with her because she was simply flattering her to death, causing this girl to live in a fog. Now that this girl actually didn't want to live like this, then her time of death had arrived. Xiaolian lowered her eyes, which were imprinted with a venomous intent. "Madam." Su Yenmo, who was walking among the crowd, slowed down her pace. Little Lien leaned over and said in a low voice, "This servant has already given the jewelry box to that girl according to Madame's instructions." It was just as Madame had expected. That girl would never refuse money. Su Yenmo turned the prayer beads in her hand. The setting sun fell, covering the entire temple's radiance. The night gradually enveloped the temple. After the rain, the temple unexpectedly appeared a little gloomy. After the vegetarian meal, according to the rules of the past, the students could rest. They could also go to the other courtyard to burn incense and divine their marriage. After waiting for the retired emperor to finish praying for blessings, only then would they go to the pavilion to appreciate poems. Hellion Vivian had just walked to the side room she was staying in. She casually picked up the teapot on the wooden table, wanting to pour a cup of water, when she heard a knock on the door from outside. Opening the door, she saw Qin Wenwan, who was riding in the same carriage as her today, standing outside the door with an umbrella in her hand. She changed her clothes and said in a low voice, "Sister, it's time to make a move." A heavy downpour came crashing down. Left with no choice, all the students put on cloaks and brought paper umbrellas into the main hall. It was inevitable that they would be disrespectful to the gods, but the retired emperor wasn't an unreasonable person. Seeing that the rain was so heavy outside, he simply ordered Eunuch Sun to call everyone to the side hall to save them from being drenched. The little eunuch who passed on the message was the one who arranged the carriage for Hellion Vivian. He shook his head. "It's really strange. Why is the rain so heavy this year? I've never seen such heavy rain in the past." "Isn't it just a rain? You're making it sound a little too bizarre." Another one disagreed. The little eunuch's eyes turned, pretending to be serious. "How is it bizarre? Look at the trees by the side of the road when we came. They were so thick, but they were broken. According to the folklore, this is a sign of great evil." "Really?" That person looked left and right, feeling his whole body turn cold. The little eunuch lowered his voice. "Generally speaking, women aren't allowed to enter the temple. However, these young ladies all have precious bodies, so there shouldn't be any problems. I'm just afraid that some of them are fated to be the bane of others, offending the Buddha." "When you say it like that, it does make some sense." Under the eaves, the two people whispered, so it was hard to avoid being overheard by others. Under this kind of atmosphere, both men and women loved to gossip. They just happened to use this matter as a starting point. The more they talked, the more excited they became and the more outrageous they became. Hellion Vivian stood at the side, leaning against the window. Looking at the pouring rain outside, she lightly wrinkled her eyebrows. She didn't know if it was because of the bad weather, but ever since she entered the temple, Hellion Vivian felt that she couldn't figure out what was going on. It was probably because Yuan Ming was asleep again. Without his annoying voice, she really couldn't get used to it. This time it wasn't because he wanted to cultivate, but because the devil and Buddha were always at odds. "Younger sister, retired emperor is about to come out. Watch carefully." Qin Wenwan stood at Hellion Vivian's side, quietly reminding her, "Don't forget the thing I gave you." Hellion Vivian faintly grunted, then stood up straight. The wooden door opened. Abbot Feng Zhang led retired emperor and his entourage out. He put his palms together, not the least bit of the irascibility he had when he first entered the mountain. Instead, he had the demeanor of a great master with a compassionate heart. "Amit Ba Shanzai Shanzai, retired emperor is wholeheartedly devoted to Buddha. This is my Buddhist sect's great fortune. Great master's too courteous." Retired emperor also put his palms together, returning the courtesy towards Abbot Feng Zhang. The smile on his face was very tolerant and magnanimous. Abbot Feng Zhang laughed, then continued to lead the way. "According to your habits every year, this old monk has already had people prepare spring water and green tea. Please. I'm also old, I only love the great master's peace and quiet here. This time I've brought a few more people. Great master, please don't find it annoying." Retired emperor said as he walked outside. "Great master, please take a look, which girl here has a good fate. That grandson of mine is also about to be decided." Just now I was bumped by Big Sister Qin. That's why the jewelry fell and disturbed the temple's peace. Asking the retired emperor for forgiveness. Qin Wenwan's eyes drooped. Feeling wronged, she said, "Little sister, you're saying it as if I deliberately bumped into you. But now that things have come to this, Big Sister doesn't care what little sister thinks. Only how could little sister bring such a malicious thing into the mountain? What if it harmed someone? A piece of wood, a few pieces of jewelry, who could harm?" After Hellion Vivian finished speaking, she wanted to go pick up the scattered objects on the ground. Hellion Jiaoer stepped forward and pressed down on her wrist. She seemed to have been angered by something. Her eyes were completely red. "Big sister, I admit that I've always treated you well. But now I can't shield you. The pieces of jewelry you're talking about, every one of them belonged to my mother. That piece of wood on the ground is the world's most vicious piece of wood. If you don't give me an explanation, I won't let it go." "Explanation?" Hellion Vivian smiled. "These pieces of jewelry were given to me by Xiaolian during the meal. She said it was your mother's dowry for me." Hellion Jiaoer tilted her head as if she was pondering something. Soon after, she said to the Emperor Emeritus, "In order to investigate this matter clearly, I ask Emperor Emeritus to allow this commoner to call Xiaolian in. The Emperor Emeritus raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, summon Xiaolian into the hall. Head Abbot Feng Zhang stood to the side. When he saw this scene he couldn't help but sigh. These kinds of methods were commonly seen in prestigious families before he had converted to Buddhism. This kind of situation clearly showed that there was someone who wanted to mess with that girl. He reckoned that letting that servant girl called Xiaolian in would only make the situation worse. The intelligent Beligaju naturally saw through this situation. His long and narrow eyes narrowed as he said in a cold tone, "It's only a few items that dropped. Is there a need to make such a big fuss?" Head Abbot Feng Zhang picked his ears in astonishment. He didn't hear wrong, right? This brat was speaking up for that girl? How was that possible? How could he speak up for a girl? It must be that this brat felt vexed and thought that the investigation would be more troublesome. That's why he said this. The Hellion Jiaoer also thought the same. She bashfully smiled at Beligaju. "Your Highness, it's not a big fuss. It's just that your Highness doesn't understand the insidious nature of this Gumu. This matter must be investigated clearly." Beligaju didn't speak again. He only raised his eyes and glanced at the Hellion Jiaoer. That glance didn't have any warmth, breaking all of his elegance. It was like a snake hibernating in the underbrush, so cold that it made people tremble with fear. Hellion Jiaoer indescribably shivered and shifted her line of sight. Her gaze fell on little Lian who was just walking in. It was originally arranged so Xiaolian wasn't very far away. She stood outside the side hall and waited, only waiting for the summons. This servant Xiaolian greets Emperor Emeritus. Long live Emperor Emeritus. Xiaolian knelt on the ground with proper etiquette, lovable and gentle. The Emperor Emeritus waved his sleeve. "Stand up." After he finished speaking, the Emperor Emeritus glanced at the Hellion Jiaoer. "If there's anything, you can ask her yourself." The Hellion Jiaoer said yes. She didn't waste time and bluntly asked, "Xiaolian, let me ask you. Did you give the jewelry on the ground that belonged to mother to eldest sister during the vegetarian meal?" Reporting to Miss. This servant did indeed follow Madam's orders to give eldest Miss a bag of jewelry during the vegetarian meal. After Xiaolian finished speaking she pretended to be puzzled and tilted her head, but in that bag of jewelry most of it was hair ornaments, not the ones on the ground. She was lying. Hellion Vivian's pupils constricted, her gaze also gradually darkening. Chapter 186. Eldest sister, what else do you have to say now? Hellion Jiaoer abruptly turned her head. Her pair of beautiful eyes looked at Hellion Vivian as if she was looking at a heartless thief. "How mother treated you, everyone saw it with their own eyes, yet you treated mother like this. Not only did you not consider her good, but you even got the witch wood and her jewelry to put a curse on her. Eldest sister, you're so ruthless." This time it could be said that the evidence was conclusive. Xiaolian's answer further proved Hellion Vivian's crime. Everyone looked at Hellion Vivian. That kind of gaze was like she was a poisonous woman. Retired Emperor's face also carried a bit of displeasure. He didn't expect that during this trip to Hidden Spirit Temple, someone would dare to use the goo in front of him. Nothing had happened yet Hellion family's girl dared to do this kind of thing. Wait until they arrived at the palace, then it would be terrible. Even if someone set a trap for her to fall into, that would also be bad luck. Retired Emperor wrinkled his thick eyebrows, his voice heavy as he said to Hellion Vivian, "What else do you want to say?" Hellion Vivian faintly smiled. "This servant girl's jewelry was indeed given to me by this servant girl. This servant girl doesn't understand why she would lie, but there is one thing I ask retired Emperor to investigate clearly. Eldest Miss, even if this servant girl is a servant girl, this servant also understands what is called propriety, justice, integrity and shame. Don't wrongly accuse this servant." Xiaolian felt wronged and her eyes reddened. Those tears fell on her small egg-like face, actually somewhat delicate and pitiful. Hellion Vivian took a step forward, reached out and pinched her lower jaw. Tilting her head she curved her thin lips, then slapped her. Slap. That kind of crisp sound reverberated in the side chamber, appearing particularly ear-piercing. Not only was Xiaolian stunned by the slap, even Eunuch's son next to retired Emperor was also shocked. According to reason, under this kind of situation, shouldn't she apologize to retired Emperor as soon as possible? This eldest Miss Hellion not only didn't apologize, but also slapped that servant girl. Such an arrogant hedonist. Did she want retired emperor to give her the death penalty? Xiaoyan never thought that Hellion Vivian would be so bold as to slap her in front of the Emperor Emeritus. She was Madame Su's head maidservant and had been in the general's residence for so many years. She lived a more comfortable life than some of the young misses in the capital. When had she ever been bullied like this? Xiaoyan's entire body trembled. She was so angry that she couldn't even utter a single word. The retired emperor didn't expect this result and was about to fly into a rage. She then heard Wei Wei's tone of voice faintly say, "I'm talking with retired emperor. When did it become your turn to interrupt? Or is it to say, based on your looks, you can also make retired emperor unable to distinguish right from wrong and punish me for no reason at all?" As soon as her voice fell, the people around her sucked in a breath of cold air. This was especially true for Eunuch's son, who was standing at the side. Even his hands were trembling. This Hellion Vivian really had guts. She actually dared to say such a thing. How could the retired emperor not understand? These words were simply meant for him to hear. In a split second, his face turned green as he continuously spat out a few words. Good, good, good. The eldest young miss of the Hellion family is truly as she said. Rude and unreasonable, unbridled and disregarding the consequences. This old man wants to listen carefully. When did I not distinguish right from wrong? The retired emperor doesn't need to be so angry. Sometimes when a person's acting skills are too good, it's indeed hard to see through them. What's more, you're also old. It's hard to avoid seeing things wrongly for a moment. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. No matter who was standing in front of her, that queenly air didn't diminish in the slightest. Apart from his own treasured grandson, there was no one else who dared to anger him like this. The retired emperor sneered, "Hellion Vivian, do you know that based on these words of yours, this emperor can take your life?" Of course, Wei Wei believes in the majesty of the emperor. Hellion Vivian's tone changed. However, in my heart, the retired emperor has always been a wise and discerning monarch. You wouldn't casually take someone's life. I won't hide it from the retired emperor. When I was young, I worshipped you the most, retired emperor. The retired emperor stared blankly. How could one give a person a slap and then give a red date? How the fuck was he supposed to call someone to drag her out and behead her? Head Abbot Feng Zhang, who was standing to one side, wanted to laugh when he heard this. Unfortunately, there weren't many occasions, so he could only pretend to clear his throat. In fact, Head Abbot Feng Zhang especially wanted to ask, where did this girl pop out from? Why was she the same as that stinky brat? When she spoke, it made people feel both hateful and itchy, yet they couldn't do anything to her. Thinking about this, Head Abbot Feng Zhang looked towards a certain person and saw that person slightly narrowed his eyes. His black jade-like pupils carried a thick sense of danger. Head Abbot Feng Zhang furrowed his brows in puzzlement. Why did this stinky brat have such a strong murderous aura? No one provoked him, right? Could it be that it was because that girl's words offended the retired emperor? While Head Abbot Feng Zhang was still guessing on this side, Hellion Jiaoer had already opened her mouth. Lian, who was stroking Xiaoyan, spoke in an indignant tone. Big sister, you're going too far. Do you think that just because you said that, the retired emperor will spare you? You curse my mother. Xiaoyan only spoke the truth, yet you beat her up like this. Is there still justice in this world? Saying this, Hellion Jiaoer walked in front of the retired emperor and heavily knelt on the ground with a paw sound. Retired emperor. Xiaoyan has followed my mother for more than 10 years and has never done anything wrong, yet she ended up like this. Jiaoer earnestly asks the retired emperor to give this commoner girl justice. Hearing this, the retired emperor pressed the space between his eyebrows. He didn't even look at Hellion Vivian again. He waved his long sleeve, annoyed and somewhat perfunctory. He originally wasn't like this. After all, that grandson of his had never asked for anything. However, this Hellion Vivian really made people not dare to compliment her. This kind of vicious and merciless girl, how could he feel at ease leaving her by his grandson's side? Shadow, who was following beside Beligaju, saw the retired emperor wave his hand. His footsteps paused and he subconsciously looked towards his highness. However, before Beligaju could open his mouth, Hellion Vivian chuckled. Younger sister keeps on cursing. Just now I wanted to ask younger sister. You only saw a corner of that piece of wood and didn't know what was written on it, yet you insist that the wood on my body was which wood? Younger sister, how much do you want the retired emperor to punish me? That's why you spared no effort. Hellion Vivian said the last sentence very indifferently. However, in Hellion Jiaoer's ears, it was extremely stupid. She was still defending herself in this kind of situation. It was truly laughable. Could it be that she couldn't see that in this kind of situation, no matter what she said, the retired emperor wouldn't spare her? Servant Xiaoyan also thought so. She sneered in her heart, but her face was tearful. Eldest miss, something has happened. It doesn't matter if you wrongly accuse me. After all, I'm just a servant. Even if you wrongly accuse me to death, it's not worth anything. However, Miss Jiaoer's heart is kind and pure, yet you say this about her. Eldest miss, you've really gone too far. Chapter 187. This wasn't just excessive, it was simply malicious. The young misses and young masters of aristocratic families all looked at Hellion Vivian with disgust. Their glances were so hateful that they immediately punished this evil woman, Hellion Vivian. Wrongly accused? Hellion Vivian smiled, her voice neither fast nor slow. Whether or not you were wrongly accused, it doesn't matter what you say. You have to find a witness. As she spoke, she raised her eyes and bowed towards head abbot Feng Zhang. Great master, ever since this commoner entered the temple, this commoner's heart has been uneasy. After receiving this jewelry bag, this commoner immediately asked the young master by your side to consecrate this commoner's jewelry for the sake of warding off evil spirits and praying for blessings. I didn't expect that it would now become evidence to prove this commoner's innocence. Would it be possible for the young master to enter the hall now? What? Xiaoyan raised her eyes in disbelief. That small tear-stained face instantly paled. The Emperor Emeritus frowned but didn't say anything. Head Abbot Feng Zhang saw Hellion Vivian's calm and quiet eyes looking at him. She claimed to be from a sect where the cool breeze comes naturally, the sea of clouds doesn't move. He felt that this matter was quite interesting, so he smiled. Of course. But I'll go call Wu Fan over. Yes, Abbot. The little monk accepted the order. Not long after, he brought someone in. Abbot, you were looking for me? This old monk wasn't looking for you, it was this benefactress who was looking for you. The little monk followed head Abbot Feng Zhang's gaze and looked over. After seeing that it was Hellion Vivian, a bashful expression appeared on his fair face. Benefactress, it's you. It's me. Hellion Vivian put her palms together and greeted politely. Little master, look at the things on the ground. Are they the jewelry that I asked you to consecrate just now? The little monk didn't understand why she asked this. Looking at the jade pendants and bracelets scattered all over the ground, he couldn't help but sigh. Amitabha, consecration is the gospel given by Buddha. How could benefactress not know how to cherish it? Little master, you've misunderstood. It's not that she doesn't know how to cherish them. It's that someone wants to frame her. They deliberately bumped into her and insisted that she stole these things. A deep and ruminating voice sounded from the side of the door. Everyone looked over only to see He-Eyes, who hadn't said a word all this while, lazily leaning against the wooden door. He crossed his arms over his chest and raised his eyes, his gaze indifferent. As soon as He-Eyes finished speaking, not only did Xiaoyan's entire body tremble, even Qin Wenwan's face paled as she took a large step back. Why did young Master He speak up for that woman? The little monk was stunned for a moment before he answered instinctively, these things all belong to that female benefactor. As he spoke, he pointed at Xiaoyan and then at Hellion Vivian. I gave it to this benefactress. This poor monk was right outside the room at the time and saw it with his own eyes. How can you say that I stole it? That is to say, someone really did lie and kept saying that he was wronged and had a sense of propriety. He-Eyes glanced at Xiaoyan with a faint smile. Madame Su's maidservant has truly opened this young master's eyes. With a snap sound, the jade bracelet in Xiaoyan's hand fell to the ground, shattering into pieces. Her eyes shook as she tried her best to suppress the panic on her face. She never would have thought that this woman would ask someone to consecrate these accessories right after she left. Was this still that uncivilized girl who didn't understand anything in the past? Since when did she have such a deep scheming heart? Xiaoyan raised her head and looked over, only to see Hellion Vivian looking at her with a faint smile. However, there wasn't the slightest trace of a smile in those eyes. Suddenly, she seemed to have understood something, and an unprecedented fear flashed through the depths of her eyes. Oh, it couldn't be. She couldn't possibly be that smart. But the things she did made it so that she couldn't help but think in that direction. Since this woman had asked the little monk to consecrate these accessories, why didn't she just directly ask the little monk to identify these accessories, instead of calling her over first? Only after she had lied according to Madame's instructions did that woman say that she had actually already asked someone to consecrate these accessories. Was she overthinking things? Why did she feel that all of this was a deliberate trap set up by Helly and Vivian? It was all for the sake of beating them at their own game and dragging them all in. Otherwise, Helly and Vivian could have called the little monk out to prove her innocence at the start. She wouldn't have had to make such an unnecessary move like this. When Xiaoyan thought of this, her entire body inexplicably shuddered. She looked at Helly and Vivian with a trembling body, as if she was looking at a demon. However, Qin Wenwan, who hadn't experienced this kind of scheming, still hadn't seen through the situation. She only glanced in Heizi's direction, her white teeth tightly biting her red lips. Young master saying this, isn't it too early to come to a conclusion? The little monk said that he consecrated Wei Wei Mimi, but who saw it? That pitiful servant girl even said that she sent over something else. There's no one to prove it, so how can you say that it was the servant girl who lied and not someone else who deceived her? Heizi still didn't speak. That little monk got angry, saying with a red face and thick neck, "Benefactress, monks don't lie. I'm a Buddhist disciple and I disdain lying to deceive others. If you don't believe me, you can have head abbot Fangzhong smell it. As long as an object has been consecrated, it will leave behind a sandalwood fragrance for an entire night." Ah, this old monk's disciple is right. Head abbot Fangzhong laughed heartily. He directly leaned over and picked up one of the jade bracelets, placing it under his nose and smelling it. It's indeed been consecrated. The little monk heavily snorted at Qin Wenwan as if saying, "You can slander me, but you can't slander my character as a monk. Monks don't lie." After seeing this scene, everyone turned silent. Their gazes couldn't help but turn towards Xiaoyan. After a servant girl delivered the accessories, she actually lied. Everyone wasn't a fool and naturally guessed that this matter wasn't so simple. Their gazes towards the Hellion Jiao also carried guesses. How could Hellion Jiao endure this kind of gaze? With a paw sound, she slapped little Yen's face with the back of her hand, as if she hated iron for not becoming steel. Her thin lips slightly trembled. "Mother, and I trusted you so much. How could you speak without thinking?" That slap was much more ruthless than the one that the Hellion Vivian had given her. When the Hellion Vivian had slapped her, she hadn't thought of slapping her until she couldn't speak anymore. After all, this play had no meaning without Xiaoyan. The Hellion Jiao, on the other hand, slapped her, bringing along a buzzing sound of martial qi. Xiaoyan's entire face was swollen, blood seeping out from the corner of her mouth. Not to mention opening her mouth to speak, even maintaining a kneeling position was a bit difficult. She also didn't dare to say anything, only continuously kowtowing, begging the Emperor Emeritus for forgiveness. It was this servant who let Miss and Madame down. It's just that eldest Miss's usual arrogance is too great. This servant couldn't bear to see it and thus lied. The Hellion Vivian calmly listened, her thin lips indifferently hooking up. Was she trying to separate Madame Su from the Hellion Jiao? Chapter 188. How could it be that easy? She had said before that she, Hellion Vivian, was someone who would not offend others unless they offended her. If they offended her, she would eliminate them completely. If they wanted to scheme against her, since they were already here, then they shouldn't think of leaving so easily. Hellion Vivian played with the jade bracelet in her hand, her tone indifferent. "You have indeed let down your Miss and Madame." Xiaoyan lowered her eyes and didn't say anything else. She understood better than anyone that in this current situation, as long as she could protect Madame and Miss, the Emperor Emeritus would only treat her as a mere servant girl who told a lie and deal with her. However, if Madame and the rest were implicated, then it wouldn't just be a matter of lying. It would be a well-planned crime of deceiving the Emperor. Thus, when she heard Hellion Vivian's words, she secretly sighed in relief, thinking that this matter would end like this. Who would have thought that Hellion Vivian's next words would be, "Because you didn't do a single thing that they entrusted you with. You even let me have a handle on you. If this isn't letting them down, then what is?" Xiaoyan's body shook heavily, then she raised her eyes. "The matter of lying was all my own idea. It has nothing to do with Miss and Madame. They also didn't instruct me to do anything. You're quite loyal knowing how to protect your master. Hellion Vivian indifferently smiled. It's just that the person you're protecting doesn't seem to think that way. Otherwise she wouldn't have used her martial chi when she slapped you. It's obvious that she's anxious to silence you. As she spoke she looked towards the Hellion Jiaoer. Don't you think so, younger sister? The Hellion Jiaoer clenched her hands, but her expression didn't change in the slightest. If Xiaoyan's plan didn't work, then there was still Qin Wenwan's plan. Qin Wenwan admired Heizei, and the reason why the Qin family could come to the capital was because of their Su family. Long before they entered the temple her mother had already planned everything. They never thought that Hellion Vivian would really get on that carriage. It was only for the sake of giving Qin Wenwan a chance to get close to Hellion Vivian. Now that the witchwood they planned was on the ground, no matter how many links there were, as long as this was there, Hellion Vivian would definitely die. Thinking to this point, the Hellion Jiaoer sensibly took a step forward, her voice gentle and magnanimous. When a servant made a mistake, of course, it's natural to punish them. Eldest sister suspecting me and mother, it's fine. But the main point of this matter, eldest sister, why you brought the witchwood, this kind of witchwood? What Miss Jiao Air says is correct. After such a ruckus, Qin Wenwan's jealousy towards Hellion Vivian grew even more. However, she concealed it very well, so much so that there was even a trace of trembling in her voice, as if she still had lingering fears from what she had just seen. Facing retired emperor, she said, "Retired emperor's trip this time was for the sake of praying for rain and blessing for the wastelands of the northern desert. Only then did you come to Hidden Spirit Temple to bathe, burn incense and eat vegetarian food for a day, all for the sake of displaying your sincerity. However, there was someone who brought witchwood along, ready to harm people at any moment. This kind of insidious method, not only did it ruin retired emperor's sincerity, it also ruined the fortune of the wastelands of the northern desert." As she spoke she looked towards Hellion Vivian. Although Wenwan's family background is low, I have to say this. Miss Weiwei wants to rely on a servant girl to divert everyone's attention, but it's completely useless. This witchwood harms people, there's no way Miss Weiwei doesn't know. Then why do you still carry it along with you? Hellion Vivian cast a sidelong glance towards Qin Wenwan. I don't know how I've offended Miss Qin, to make Miss Qin be so overbearing towards me. Before entering the temple Miss Qin still called me younger sister, younger sister. After entering the temple, you can't wait to see if I'm that wicked beyond redemption person. Then shouldn't I be suspicious of Miss Chen's original purpose for approaching me? Miss Hellion, you actually look at me like this. Qin Wenwan's eyes shook as if there was a glimmer of water swirling within. Outside the temple I saw that you met with difficulties, so I let you enter my carriage. Now Miss Hellion unexpectedly said that I had an ulterior motive. As she spoke she tilted her head and used the handkerchief in her hand to wipe the corners of her eyes, appearing extremely wronged. Hellion Jiaoer shook her head and looked towards Hellion Vivian with condemnation in her eyes. Eldest sister, I really don't understand how the current you became like this. We helped you, yet you feel that we have an ulterior motive. You're jealous of us in your heart, so you brought those things that can't be brought to the table. Eldest sister, you don't know how much this younger sister's heart hurts seeing you like this. The thing on the ground hasn't been picked up yet you and Miss Qin insist that it's witchwood. Hellion Vivian smiled, traces of coldness entering her eyes. You're really a good younger sister. I've never seen a younger sister who's so eager for her older sister to die. As she spoke Hellion Vivian bent down and picked up that piece of witchwood that was still hidden in the yellow cloth bag. She lightly pushed it up and that piece of witchwood was completely exposed. This is the witchwood that you keep on talking about. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and smiled. I'll have to ask Eunuch Sun to step forward and see whether or not this is an evil thing that harms people. Hellion Jiaoer was the closest to Hellion Vivian. Now that she clearly saw the words engraved on that piece of sandalwood, her expression suddenly changed greatly and all of a sudden she was somewhat flustered. Eunuch Sun also stared blankly. What kind of witchwood was wrapped in that yellow cloth? There wasn't cinnabar, there wasn't the 8 characters of birth, and there wasn't even any witchcraft. On the wood, there was a set of words quietly engraved. The momentum was ingenious, the shape was dense, the strength was good, and the spirit was calm and refined. Each word was very scribbled, yet it also penetrated deep into the bone. The country is prosperous and the people are at peace. 4 simple words, yet it made Eunuch Sun take another look at Hellion Vivian. Nowadays, there were very few women in the world who could have such a breadth of mind. He couldn't help but smile. Miss Hellion can be this magnanimous, truly makes this old servant admire you. If this old servant's guess isn't wrong, this ought to be the hidden spirit temple's incense wood. It's been exposed to the smell of incense all year round and can concentrate and nourish the eyes. Only, I don't know how Miss Hellion obtained this piece of incense wood. Once Eunuch Sun's voice fell, the people present were in an uproar. Wasn't it witchwood? How did it become incense wood? Incense wood. Chen Wenwan was even more shocked. Turning her head to look, her lips were pale and somewhat trembling. How was this possible? That yellow cloth was clearly something she handed over to Hellion Vivian. Inside that cloth was witchwood engraved with curse words. How could it become incense wood? Eunuch Sun, could it be that you saw wrongly? Chen Wenwan panicked, anxiously wanting to take a step forward to take a closer look. Hellion Vivian's body moved to the side, blocking in front of her. Her lips curved into a light smile. Miss Chen, how much do you hope that this is a piece of witch wood? So much so that you don't even believe Eunuch Sun's words. Hellion Vivian. Chen Wenwan took a deep breath. Don't speak nonsense. I'm only afraid that Eunuch Sun's eyes were blurred for a moment and made a mistake letting the wicked go. Chapter 189. She bit her lip, still wanting to say something. But then she heard a deep and indifferent voice, languid and extremely sexy. You don't believe in Eunuch Sun's eyesight, but what about this highness? Baligaju walked out from the deep shadows. His elegant figure appeared exceptionally handsome under the contrast of the fur cloak. His eyebrows and eyelashes were deep, his black eyes were deep, and his temperament was outstanding, so cold that it made people terrified. Chen Wenwan's entire body trembled. Her legs were so weak that she wanted to kneel on the ground. Seeing this, the Emperor Emeritus wrinkled his brows, his expression also becoming cold. Bring the thing over. Yes. Eunuch Sun raised his hands high, presenting the incense wood. When he saw the words engraved on the incense wood, the Emperor Emeritus's eyes flashed. He turned his head to look at Hellion Vivian. This is... Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. Wei Wei said that she worships Emperor Emeritus very much. During this time of drought, you personally went up the mountain to pray for blessings. Wei Wei admires your concern for the country and the people. A commoner woman is light and weak, so there's not much to do. I only heard that the incense wood in this hidden spirit temple will grant one's wishes, so I had the little monk bring me to a side courtyard to ask for one. The little monk stood beside Hellion Vivian and nodded his head heavily. He chanted Amit Bach before saying, Benefactress walked all the way here, going up 199 steps and kowtowed a total of 990 times. With such sincerity, Buddha will definitely bless you with good news. Holding the incense wood in his hand, the Emperor Emeritus felt as if he had been slapped in the face. After a moment of silence, he turned to look at Hellion Vivian. For the first time, his usually calm eyes carried an apologetic expression. Good child, you're very considerate. Having heard what was said, Hellion Jiao Air's complexion became exceptionally unsightly. She abruptly clenched both of her hands, then slowly released them again. She suddenly realized that no matter if it was her little Lien or Chen Wenwan, they'd all been duped by Wei Wei. Before they entered the temple, Hellion Vivian had expected everything. She had held back not because she was flustered, but because she was waiting for them to walk right into her trap. At this moment, the Hellion Jiao regretted to the extreme. The woman in front of her was really different from before. Not only was her martial qi different, but she was also scheming. Originally, she wanted to frame her in front of the Emperor Emeritus so that she could completely infuriate the Emperor Emeritus and never have the chance to make a comeback. Now she had unintentionally paved the way for that woman. After such an incident, the Emperor Emeritus would definitely feel guilty towards Hellion Vivian. In the future he might even take care of her. Thinking of this, the Hellion Jiao's heart was filled with hatred. She forcefully bit through the thin flesh in her mouth. Her mouth was full of blood, but she had no choice but to swallow it down. Hellion Vivian looked at her and smiled faintly. Now that I've proven my innocence, I have something I want to ask little sister and Miss Chen. I clearly have a piece of incense wood on me, so why did you say it was witchwood without even looking at it? What is the reason for this? Chen Wenwan's thin and colorless lips couldn't say a single word. Hellion Jiao forced a smile. From a distance, That incense would look similar to witchwood. That's why little sister thought. Little sister. Hellion Vivian calmly interrupted her words. You want to tell me that this is all a misunderstanding? Hellion Jiaoer nodded, the rims of her eyes slightly red. I've wronged big sister. We really did see wrongly. So wrongly? I think it's little sister who doesn't understand why the witchwood you put on me would turn into a piece of incense wood, right? After Hellion Vivian said this, she turned to look at the Emperor Emeritus. I won't hide it from the Emperor Emeritus. I really do have a piece of witchwood here. What? Everyone looked at each other in dismay. They really didn't understand why this Hellion Vivian, who had just removed herself from the rumors of the witchwood, would personally admit that she had a piece of witchwood. However, only Qin Wenwan realized what she was going to say, and her entire person stood up. Hellion Vivian lightly swept a glance at her and continued, Only, this piece of witchwood was given to me by Miss Qin before entering the temple. Hellion Vivian, don't make slanderous accusations. Qin Wenwan furiously roared. That kind of twisted little face didn't have the slightest bit of gentleness from before. Hellion Vivian smiled, her eyes shining as if they were covered with a layer of dazzling light. Miss Qin, the ones making slanderous accusations from start to finish were you guys. Why do you think I wanted to cooperate with you and get on your carriage? I just wanted to see what kind of tricks you were going to play. I really didn't expect that Madame Su, in order to deal with me, would actually send a young miss from an aristocratic family. Miss Qin, you're not a student from White Academy who's participating in this year's exam, yet you appeared in the entourage. Presumably, only the Su family who can cover the sky with one hand in the imperial court can help you do this. Only you've underestimated me too much. You want to kill me with just a piece of witchwood? You really think I, Hellion Vivian, am still that year when I let you bully me, the orphan child who can't speak? As she spoke, Hellion Vivian took a step forward and heavily kneeled on the ground. Her voice was louder than Hellion Vivian's kneeling and more solid. The instant her long skirt fell to the ground, it practically stirred up the water on the ground. The drizzle drizzled and the evening wind gusted. Hellion Vivian raised her head, her long sleeves fluttering in the wind. Retired Emperor, that year my grandfather was 60 years old. In order to protect the Dragon War Empire's territory, he overturned the border with his army and dyed the mountains with blood. He brandished a war blade and spread the spirit of war. Therefore you conferred my Hellion bloodline as the Defense Department, meaning to protect the family for the country and wholeheartedly serve the people. But unfortunately I've been a good-for-nothing since childhood. I don't have a grandfather nor do I have a mother. Even the position of the head of the family was given to someone else. Therefore I deserve to be bullied and humiliated, cursed as a barbaric profligate. After all, I lost my own family business. As Hellion Vivian spoke, her back was very straight. Although she was in a kneeling position, she gave everyone a kind of indescribable handsomeness. But now that I've grown up, I understand what honor and disgrace are. I don't want to let people smear my reputation like this and not say anything. I think that year, when my grandfather brandished his blade to protect the family and the country, it wasn't for the day that I would stand here and be schemed against for no reason. When I was young, he would hold me in his arms. The sentence he said the most was, Yaoer, when you grow up, you must become a top-notch martial chi master and follow by retired emperor's side. Only this way can you protect my Dragon War Empire and ensure the prosperity of the people. All these years, no matter what happened, I've always remembered these words. I thought that when I reached a certain height I would tell you these words. But now it seems that you may not want to hear them. After all, the current head of the Defense Department is also surnamed Su. Retired Emperor, you also have misgivings. Retired Emperor looked at the small face before his eyes that was somewhat similar to old man Helien's. His heart received a huge shock. He suddenly realized that previously he wasn't willing to let his grandson marry this child. Was he really wrong? Chapter 190. He had watched that girl of the Hellion family grow up since she was a child. How could that girl's daughter be as unbearable as the rumors? It was because he had been in this position for a long time. He had heard a lot and thought a lot. He considered himself to be a wise ruler who empathized with his old generals. He had never mistreated any of the generals who had fought alongside him in the past. But today he discovered that he had actually let the granddaughter of his greatest hero suffer endless grievances. Thinking about what happened just now, the retired emperor's heart was in turmoil. If it wasn't for this child's actions, he might not have done anything to the Su family in the end. Su family, Su family. The retired emperor took a deep breath and slammed the prayer beads he was fiddling with onto the table. Even his tone was filled with anger. Go and call Su Shi over for this emperor. Yes. As Eunuch Sun's voice fell, Helian Jiaoer was like a frosted eggplant. She took a step back in a daze. When Eunuch Sun brought Madame Su over, Madame Su saw her personal maid kneeling on the ground from afar. Her heart immediately turned cold. Originally, Madame Su thought that Helian Vivian was just a little girl and wouldn't be difficult to deal with, so she sent one of her maids to do it. Everything should have been flawless, so why was Xiaolian the one kneeling on the ground? Something must have gone wrong. The intelligent Madame Su used a few seconds to scan the faces of her beloved daughter and Chen Wenwan. However, in an instant she understood what was going on. Her first instinct was to minimize the problem. This was because this matter could be explained by the younger generation as messing around. If she was also involved, the nature of the matter would be different. Therefore, even if it was a pity, some chess pieces could only be discarded. Madame Su tightened her grip on the handkerchief in her palm, but she didn't lose her composure on the surface. She lowered her body and bowed. This subject woman pays respect to retired emperor. May this subject woman pay respect to you. The retired emperor did not ask her to get up. He just looked at her condescendingly and said in an indifferent tone, this emperor remembers that Minister Chen, who just entered the capital recently, was promoted by your Su family. As a woman, I am not clear about the matters of the previous dynasty. Su Yenmo tightened her grip on her handkerchief to make herself look normal. Brother never talks about these things. The retired emperor narrowed his eyes. Then you don't know this Miss Chen in front of you? I've never seen him before. It was true that Su Yenmo had never met Chen Wenwan before. It was a big deal for the ministers to form cliques for personal gain. If the womenfolk were too close, it would also raise suspicions. Furthermore, her brother had just promoted the one with the surname Chen. Even if she used the Chen family, it was only through letters and had never met. If it wasn't for that little vile spawn tossing and turning around in the White Academy too fiercely this time, causing Jiao Air to lose face again and again, she wouldn't have used this chess piece buried in the White Academy in advance. The retired emperor looked at Su Yenmo's expression and knew that it would be a dead end if he continued to ask, so he simply smiled and said, then you don't know that your beloved daughter Helian Jiaoer colluded with Miss Chen to harm others? There's actually such a thing? Su Yenmo's eyes shook. She looked at Helian Jiaoer in disbelief. Jiaoer, who did you harm? What did I tell you on a daily basis? Your naivety will inevitably be used by others. What happened this time? If Helian Vivian didn't know what kind of person Madame Su was, she was afraid that she would also be deceived by her acting skills. In addition, she didn't know the details of what happened here before she came, so she could only silently endure it. She turned her head to face the retired emperor and said, Retired emperor, I know that daughter of mine. Her temperament is very weak. Could there be some kind of misunderstanding? Misunderstanding? The retired emperor's eyes were calm and his tone was low. Your daughter instigated Miss Chen to bring the witchwood into the temple in order to frame others. Your personal maid is kneeling here. What kind of misunderstanding do you think there could be? Not only are you full of lies, but you also frame others. Su Yenmo, is this how your Su family teaches people? Chapter 191. Su Yenmo didn't think that the retired emperor would be so angry. She represented the Su and He families. Even if this matter was exposed, the retired emperor would control the influence of this matter to a certain extent in order to balance the court and restrain his relatives. However, today the retired emperor obviously wanted to punish severely. This caught Su Yenmo completely unprepared. She didn't know what Wei Wei actually did to make the retired emperor, who always knew how to weigh the pros and cons, make such a raging decision. She could only kneel on the ground and complain about her injustice. Retired emperor, I wasn't here just now. I also don't know why Xiaolian is kneeling here. As for what retired emperor said about framing others, I don't understand at all. Good, very good. The retired emperor stood up and said, since you don't understand anything, then go back and tell Prime Minister Su that I want to keep a low profile on this trip to the Hidden Spirit Temple. That's why I let him handle the preparations. Seems that I've given some people convenience that they shouldn't have. In the future, he doesn't need to care about the affairs of Minghuang Palace. Just be his prime minister. These words didn't have any deterrent force. However, Su Yenemo understood that this kind of decision was to weaken the Su family's power. Her heart thumped loudly. She raised her eyes and looked at her beloved daughter, whose face was pale. No matter how unwilling she was, this was the result. She had to think of a way to protect Jiao Air. One had to know that her future was limitless. She couldn't fall in this kind of internal strife between women. Thinking of this, Madame Su kowtowed heavily and said to the Emperor Emeritus, "Emperor Emeritus, this subject knows that you are angry because of this incident, but who saw this subject's daughter instructing people? What evidence do you have?" As she spoke, Madame Su looked at Chen Wenwan. "Miss Chen, my Su family has no enmity with you. We're not close. You did something wrong. Why did the retired emperor say that you were instructed by my daughter?" Hearing this, Chen Wenwan trembled. How could she not understand that Madame Su was giving her a warning? She wanted her to judge the situation before speaking. For such a long time, the Qin family was able to climb to this point because of the Su family. Mrs. Su's meaning was obvious. Since the Su family could make the Qin family prosper, they could also ruin the Qin family. Qin Wenwan laughed out loud. Suddenly, her eyes sunk and her voice contained pain. This matter was all done by me alone without anyone's instructions. She's only an ugly woman without the slightest bit of beauty, yet she still hooks up with this and that all day long. She didn't even let young Master He off. Truly disgusting to the extreme. If I don't give this kind of person some face to see, my heart won't be at ease. It's just that I underestimated some people's thoughts. On the surface they accepted my good intentions and were intimate with me, but in reality they were always thinking of how to guard against me. In the end I'm too naive. You can kill me or cut me up as you wish. You used the witchwood because you were jealous? Madame Su came to a sudden realization, and her eyes swept over He eyes intentionally or unintentionally. So the one you like is the second son of the He family. He Zai's expression did not change as he watched this scene. His eyes were cold. In that instant Qin Wenwan lowered her head even more. She blankly looked at the wet bluestone path in front of her. As early as when she first entered the capital, she already liked that young Master He who could handle any situation with ease no matter what. She knew better than anyone that the woman he would marry in the future, if not a noble family, then she would be a princess. Her birth, her family background, she was definitely a match for him. Madame Su saw through her thoughts at that tea party. She said that recently, Master He was anxious to find a wife for that person. As long as she succeeded in this matter, not only would her father's official career become better and better, she would also be able to enter the He Manor as she wished. But this trip to Hidden Spirit Temple, she discovered that no matter how high she climbed, that person would not have her shadow in his eyes. Based on what? If she lost to someone else, then forget it. An ugly woman who was banished from the family without power or influence, and even that face was enough to turn people off, was able to make that person treat her so differently. She couldn't accept it. She thought that as long as she got rid of this ugly woman she would have a chance. But she didn't expect that everything was just a dream. Now she woke up from her beautiful dream. He simply couldn't remember the young girl he supported at the tea party. Now when he looked at her, the disgust in his eyes made her wish that nothing had ever happened. Chen Wenwan had never regretted it as much as she did now. She trembled as she waited for the retired emperor's fury. Madame Su was very satisfied with this Chen Wenwan's understanding of the big picture. She raised her head and said to the retired emperor, "Retired emperor, now the matter is already very clear. It was only jealousy between children that caused this Qin family's young miss to do such a disgraceful thing." The retired emperor didn't speak but lowered his gaze. Hellion Vivian smiled. She never thought that this matter would completely drag down Madame Su. If it was that simple she wouldn't have established profound heavens. She understood Madame Su's scheming more than anyone else, as well as the Su family's position in the imperial court. Even if the instigator was Madame Su, Qin Wenwan still wouldn't expose her. This was a very obvious matter. Because in the Dragon War Empire, the four great clans' power was expanding. This made Qin Wenwan worried that after she told the truth, the Qin family would be exterminated. Madame Su was indeed smart and knew how to use power to oppress people. But what she didn't understand was that it was precisely because of this point that it made the retired emperor even more brooding. How could the retired emperor allow a power that was faintly beginning to suppress the imperial family? And what Hellion Vivian wanted was precisely this result. In the future, if she wanted to take back the Hellion family, she would have to face the 4 great clans. Just based on her own power, how could it be enough? She had to drag the retired emperor over as well. Hellion Vivian raised her head. When she met the retired emperor's scrutinizing eyes, she suddenly stared blankly. She seemed to have understood something in her heart. She actually forgot that if she did this kind of thing, the retired emperor would very likely perceive her purpose. As the saying goes, this monarch's experience was more than the salt they ate. How could he not see the twists and turns in this matter? But what made her puzzled was the retired emperor's attitude towards this matter. The retired emperor looked at that dark little face that revealed a blank expression. He felt that it was a bit like that little 7th grandson of his. His heart also softened, thinking that in any case he wouldn't be able to persuade that ice-cold grandson who kept his word. Since he started speaking just now, that ice-cold youngster had been standing by his side, sneering from time to time. It was obvious that he wasn't happy. He was already so old. Basically, everything he did was for the younger generation. Since that precious grandson of his had a choice, no matter what his purpose was, he would just follow his wishes. Right now he actually had a bit of hope that that ice-cold youngster sincerely wanted to marry this girl and not for other reasons. Chapter 192. In the past, when he saw this girl, he had a very bad impression of her. It was probably because all women were like this, they only had feelings in their hearts. At that time, this girl's heart was hung up on that marriage agreement with the Murong family. Everything she did was a joke. Seeing her today, the retired emperor felt as if he had just met this girl. She advanced step by step without panic. Most importantly, even though she was young, she actually knew how to weigh the pros and cons. Most importantly, she was affectionate and righteous. If Old Third married her in the future, he would also live a happy life. The retired emperor had also thought about who would be suitable to spend the rest of his life with his grandson, who had a temperament as cold as ice. After thinking about it, there were many with good family backgrounds. Perhaps he wanted to warm up his heart, but there really weren't any. For so many years, the retired emperor had always been worried that Baligaju would go astray and become a tyrant. After all, that kind of temperament was unfathomable. It was indeed suitable to be an emperor, but it was too cold. It was as if the people in this world were not important to him. Everyone said that to be an emperor one didn't need feelings. Yes, if an emperor had feelings he would have ties. However, that didn't mean that he had to be an extremely cold-blooded emperor who monopolized the world. If that was the case, the ones who would suffer would be the common people. The cold brat needed such a person who could soften him up occasionally. This kind of person couldn't just rely on naivety and innocence. In the imperial palace and the imperial court, there were too many temptations. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause one to fall into a trap. This girl had to be firm but not hard, strong but not barbaric. She had to have her own perseverance to not be easily swallowed up. Until now he had only found this sign in this girl. When the retired emperor thought of this, his expression relaxed a lot when he looked at Hellion Vivian. This made Hellion Vivian somewhat at a loss. Then she inexplicably touched the bridge of her nose. What did the retired emperor's inexplicable satisfied gaze mean? It had to be said that Hellion Vivian had a pair of eyes that people naturally liked. Although her face was a little dark, her eyes were very dazzling when she was smart and very cute when she was in a daze. The more the retired emperor looked, the more satisfied he became. In his heart he had already classified Hellion Vivian as simple, honest and intelligent. Withdrawing his gaze, he placed it on Qin Wenwan's body. This emperor will ask you one last question. Is everything you said true? Yes. Qin Wenwan bit her lip. She knew that her momentum was already lost. Kneeling on the ground, she didn't even raise her eyes. These matters were all done by this humble girl alone. It has nothing to do with anyone else. The retired emperor's expression was indifferent. Someone come, take her away for this emperor and put her in prison. She will be dealt with when we return to the capital. Yes. The secret guard accepted the order. The retired emperor continued. Write a letter to the emperor. Remove Qin Hui's crown and send his entire family back to their original place. Within 7 years they are not allowed to enter the court. When Qin Wenwan, whose eyes had originally darkened, heard these words, she suddenly turned her head. Retired Emperor, what does this have to do with father? You want to deal with him? How did your father get to this position? When the retired emperor said these words, his gaze swept past Madame Su's back inch by inch. This emperor knows in his heart. Your father also knows in his heart. Qin Wenwan stiffened. Her gaze wavered as she looked at Su Yenemo. She clearly wanted her to plead for leniency on behalf of the Qin family. Su Yenemo didn't say anything. She didn't even look at Qin Wenwan. She maintained her original position without blinking. In that instant Qin Wenwan struggled and wanted to shout something. However, she discovered that her throat unexpectedly made a sound. How could this be? Qin Wenwan struggled to move forward. Recalling that she had just been in contact with Madame Su, she suddenly understood something. That small face twisted to the extreme, as if she couldn't wait to chew up Madame Su and swallow her whole. She actually believed that as long as she didn't give her away, she would protect the Qin family. She didn't expect that from the beginning. What this vicious woman wanted to do was to silence her. Qin Wenwan felt her entire body's meridians ache. She couldn't even cry out for injustice before she was taken away by the secret guard. Su Yenemo saw that the only person who could possibly threaten her had become a death warrant. Her thumping heart could be considered to have settled down. When she looked at the retired emperor again, she also relaxed quite a bit. Retired emperor is brilliant. She didn't expect that the retired emperor would only look at her indifferently. His bearing didn't diminish. As for the Hellion Jiaoer, as a student of the superior compound, her conduct is not upright. Indiscriminately she slandered others. Tomorrow, let her stay in this hidden spirit temple's firewood shed to properly reflect on where she was wrong. When she finally understands, then she can return to the capital. Hearing this, the Hellion Jiaoer trembled from head to toe. Abruptly, she turned to look at Madame Su. She couldn't stay here. This was a temple. She was a young girl who had yet to be betrothed. If word got out that she was staying here, what would happen? Would there still be anyone who would marry her in the future? What's more, when would she have thought it through? The martial qi competition was about to begin. The winner would become the third princess consort. This was something that the retired emperor had promised her in front of everyone. His words were golden and couldn't be changed. She was the one who wanted to win the championship. If she was trapped here, how could she participate in the competition? The Hellion Jiaoer panicked. Her pair of limpid eyes were filled with uneasiness. She looked at Hellion Vivian with an unprecedented malevolence. It was all because of this cheap woman. If it weren't for her, the retired emperor wouldn't have made such a decision. The retired emperor had always praised her. He even revealed that he wanted to make her the third princess consort. Now all of this was ruined by this cheap woman. The Hellion Jiaoer bit the tender meat in her mouth. Her fingertips were imprinted into the palm of her hand. Madame Su was afraid that her beloved daughter wouldn't be able to bear it. She reached out and pressed down on her arm. Suppressing her sullenness, she said, "What the retired emperor said is right." This time she was too insensible. She was warm-hearted, but she didn't expect to fall into someone else's trap. "I ask that the retired emperor consider my brother and the Defense Division residents and punish her lightly. The martial qi competition will be held soon. The elders have already chosen Jiaoer to represent our Dragon War Empire. I ask that the retired emperor carefully reconsider." When Hellion Vivian heard this, she couldn't help but admire Madame Su's intelligence. If she had used other things to pressure the retired emperor might have punished the Hellion Jiaoer even more severely. But if it was the empire's honor, even the retired emperor must consider the overall situation and reduce the punishment for the Hellion Jiaoer. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to explain himself in front of the common people. Sure enough, the retired emperor's long eyebrows wrinkled. It wasn't difficult to see that he was enduring silently. Madame Su knew that she had made the right bet. The corners of her mouth curved up. Just as she was about to smile, she heard a sentence from the flat bottom. "Since it's like this, then let the madam take the place of her beloved daughter to receive the punishment." Chapter 193. Two voices sounded at the same time. One was Hellion Vivian, languid and indolent, with a smile on her lips. The other one was Bailey Jiaju. He was tilting his head. His silver face was as perfect as an ice sculpture. He slowly rolled up his sleeves. The corners of his mouth curved into a devilishly cold smile. His voice was low and sexy, but it also carried the indifference to the world. Hellion Vivian didn't expect that the royal family would have the same thoughts as her, turning her eyes to the side to look at the man. The third prince, however, had an indifferent appearance, only raising his eyebrows at her. Head Abbot Feng Zhang glared. What did he say? This girl was just a little similar to this stinking brat. Look, all of the methods that were mentioned were exactly the same. It was shocking. The retired emperor was also stunned, then laughed. Then we'll do as Hellion Vivian said, let Madame Su take the blame. The retired emperor is wise. Hellion Vivian looked back and saluted without being surprised by honor or disgrace. Su Yenmo's grip on the Hellion Jiaoer tightened, her eyes filled with hatred. Making her, a first-rank madam, stay in the temple to abstain from meat and recite Buddha. If this wasn't extraordinary shame and humiliation, what was? She forced herself to calm down, looked towards the retired emperor and was just about to speak. Hellion Vivian interrupted her. Madame Su, don't tell me you also have a test to compete in? Su Yenmo breathed slowly, the corners of her mouth stiff. No. Was this little vile spawn deliberately using her words just now to block her? She was already so old, how could there be a test to compete in? Hellion Vivian acted as if she didn't see Madame Su's anger, her voice indifferent. Since that's the case, the mother should repay the child's debt. Nothing could be more suitable. Hellion Jiaoer was so angry that her teeth were itching. She really wanted to raise all the martial qi in her body, directly rush over and slaughter Hellion Vivian. But on the surface she only held Madame Su's hand, shaking her head back and forth. How can I let my mother take the blame for me? The one at fault is clearly me. Both her eyes were red, her eyelashes drooping, stained with a layer of moisture, unexpectedly giving people the feeling that they couldn't bear to look at her. Hellion Vivian knew that Hellion Jiaoer was acting again. However, as matters stood, no matter how she acted, she couldn't hide the fact that she harbored evil intentions. Everybody wasn't a fool. Through this matter, they more or less knew that Hellion Jiaoer wasn't as magnanimous and naive as she appeared on the surface. Of course, some people would still be mesmerized by her appearance, especially those young masters of aristocratic families who loved beauties to the extreme. Wei Wei straightened her collar, tilted her head and smiled. Then younger sister's meaning is that you want to stay in the temple by yourself? This kind of filial piety is indeed touching. Hellion Jiaoer was choked by Hellion Wei Wei until her complexion changed. She bit her lips until they were bright red. She angrily clenched her teeth. How could she possibly mean that? What she thought was that if she cried a bit, maybe there would be someone who would help her and her mother plead for leniency. After all, the people standing here were all young masters from influential families in the capital. There were quite a few people who were on good terms with the Su family. If they opened their mouths, retired emperor would have to think a bit more. But before anyone could say anything, this bitch blocked all of her escape routes. This time she really didn't know what to do. Hellion Jiaoer clenched her hands, looking at Su Yenmo at a loss. Mother. Su Yenmo closed her eyes tightly, and when she opened them again she weighed the pros and cons. Her daughter was highly valued by the four great families. She would definitely be rich in the future. If she was punished today, she was afraid that she would never be able to wash away the humiliation in this lifetime. Moreover, she was already a married woman. Even if she lost face, it would be like needles piercing her flesh every time she went out in the future. But that was only a small matter. As long as the Su family was strong enough, no one would dare to talk about it in front of her. Just like how she dealt with that bitch Hellion in the past. Therefore Su Yenmo chose to protect her beloved daughter in the end. She lowered her eyes slightly, hinting at something. Jiaoer has grown up to be like this. It's all because I, as her mother, didn't tell her that people are unpredictable. If Madame Su still refuses to forgive her, then let me take her place to suffer. On the surface, it seemed like she was admitting her mistake, but if someone who didn't understand the situation heard it, they would think that Hellion Vivian was not magnanimous enough and insisted on punishing Hellion Jiaoer. Hellion Vivian laughed coldly, her eyes met Su Yenmo's face, pausing after each word. Madam, I think you must have misunderstood the situation. Now it's not that people are unpredictable, it's that Madame Su is immoral and wants to frame others. Madam, are you saying that the retired emperor's judgment is unfair? Of course not. Su Yenmo's fingers stiffened as she looked at the gaze that retired emperor cast towards her. She was afraid that she'd said something wrong and let retired emperor find an excuse to heavily punish Hellion Jiao Heir. Helpless, in order to protect her beloved daughter as much as possible, she could only soften her attitude in front of Wei Wei. What I want to say is that you can blame me and you can also blame your second sister for doing something wrong this time. However, we still treat you as one of our own. After saying that, Su Yenemo only felt that she had lost all face. But what could she do? There was no other way. Things had come to this point, she could only do this. What she didn't expect was that this little bastard would be so eloquent. Even she was forced into a situation where she couldn't advance or retreat. If she had known that she would become so restless, she wouldn't have thought about the little bit of Hellion blood in her body that year and didn't eliminate this little bastard completely. She only destroyed her martial chi and broke her meridians, thinking that she would be fine after becoming a good-for-nothing. When Jiao Heir needed to advance, she could extract Hellion blood from this good-for-nothing at any time and anywhere to help Jiao Heir break through the bottleneck quickly. Now it seemed that she shouldn't have left this troublesome little bastard alive. She should have killed her just like how she killed her mother, that bitch. Hellion Vivian's gaze fell on Su Yenmo's pair of eyes filled with malice, very lightly laughed. Madam, you think too much, I have never blamed you all. It's hate, I can't wait to turn all of you into ashes as a sacrifice to the hundreds of loyal souls of the Hellion family who were persecuted because of the change of ownership of the family. Madam has taken care of me for so long, I still want to repay her kindness. That year when you made my mother so angry that she fell ill and left, I will let you have a taste of the same feeling. What's there to talk about forgiving or not forgiving? This is only the beginning. If I don't expose your true colors and force you into a dead end, how can I be worthy of the humiliation you have inflicted on me all these years? You're really treating me like an outsider. This is only the beginning. I only slapped your face once and lost face once. How is that enough? What I want is for your Su family to pay the blood debt in blood. Just wait until I rise little by little and empty your Su family. At that time, your expression will definitely be interesting. Chapter 194. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian ran her fingers across the thin calluses on her fingertips. Looking at Su Yenmo's slightly stiff face, she slowly smiled. No matter how much hatred Su Yenmo had in her heart, she could only force a gentle smile on her face and wait for this matter to pass quietly. Fortunately, the retired emperor had accepted her explanation. No matter how terrible the situation was now, her beloved daughter was still the genius that everyone supported and was most likely to become the third princess consort. She believed that the retired emperor would also consider this point. In the Dragon War Empire, it was useless no matter how smart one was. Only those who had extraordinary martial chi cultivation had the right to speak. That little bastard, sooner or later he would pay the price for what he did today. He was not in a hurry. Su Yenmo lowered her eyes and fiddled with the prayer beads in her hand. She was led by the young monk to the most remote courtyard of the temple. Generally speaking, women were not allowed to stay in the temple because they were worried that they would violate the temple's rules. However, the difference between the Hidden Spirit Temple and other temples was that because it was known as a royal temple, the people who came to offer incense and pray every year were basically the high-ranking members of the royal family. Among them, there were many women who would be in danger when they went down the mountain at night. Therefore, the temple set aside a courtyard to accommodate the women. However, this courtyard looked too desolate. The decorations inside were also very simple, just like a cold palace. The only good thing was that there was no smell in the room. But just this was enough to make Su Yenmo unbearable. Since young, she had always been the apple of everyone's eye. Even after she snatched Hellion Guangyao, she was still pampered and respected. Even in the circle of Siju City, which one of those high officials and nobles did not rush to curry favor with her when they saw her. Now she was forced to live in a place that was worse than a woodshed. The hatred that Su Yenmo had just suppressed all gushed out in an instant. Hellion Jiao came with her mother. When she saw the house, she subconsciously covered her mouth and nose with a handkerchief. She reached out and pulled Su Yenmo's sleeve. "Mother, let's go find grandfather and ask him to go directly to the palace to hand over the memorial. How can anyone live in such a house? No, mother, you can't live here. If I don't live here, then you have to." Madame Su glanced at her, then pulled her hand out and gently closed the wooden door. Only then did she reveal the viciousness in her eyes. "Your grandfather is now thinking of a way to get the military power in his hands. He must coax the emperor to come and not make any mistakes. If we let him submit a memorial for such a small matter, the retired emperor will not be happy. Hellion Jiaoer clenched her fists. What should we do? Is mother really going to stay here for a month? Mother will find a way to get out of here in less than a month. You, on the other hand, Madame Su looked at her. There was a hint of coldness in her eyes. How many times has mother said that no matter what happens, you have to suffer until the end in front of others? You can't easily reveal your true feelings. All these years you have been doing very well. Mother has never told you much, but today, you almost made mother unable to clean up the mess. Hellion Jiaoer lowered her eyes and bit her red lips. Mother, your daughter is wrong. As she spoke, she fiercely gritted her teeth. It's just that little bitch is too hateful. Look at what she said. Not only was it directed at me, but it was also directed at you, mother. She put us in an awkward position in front of everyone. I won't let this matter go so easily. That little bitch has grown up to be what she is today. It is indeed unexpected. Su Yenemo reached out her hand and patted the back of Hellion Jiaoer's hand. Don't worry, she won't be able to get any benefits with such a savage temperament. The martial chi test is coming soon. Your grandfather should have told you to focus on this. Jiaoer, you have to understand that in our Dragon War Empire, one's family background and martial chi are the most important. No matter how much that little bitch tosses around, she won't be able to make a splash. Now that she has been expelled from the family, it is impossible for her to participate in any big meetings, unless she really has some kind of innate ability. But as you can see in this time's test, she didn't even dare to touch martial chi. The armaments she made are indeed amazing, but as long as there is a day when she doesn't have martial chi, then the things she makes will not be recognized by the elders. Even if she is the only disciple of Grandmaster Zizun, she can only stare blankly at that pile of scrap metal. This is life. So, Jiaoer, you don't have to dirty your hands for such a little bitch. When you stand out in the martial chi test, you won't even know where she went. Do you understand what I said? Hellion Jiaoer nodded, her fingers clenched again. Mother, I understand what you said, but to let me suffer such a loss, I really can't take it lying down. If the people in the capital knew about this, who knows what they would say about me and mother. So you have to win even more. Su Yenmo's gaze was long, her tone was determined to win. Your father has already contacted the people of Profound Heaven. You just have to wait for the best armaments to go on stage. After so many days, Hellion Jiaoer finally heard a piece of news that made people feel comfortable. She reached out and held Su Yenmo's arm, her tone carried a hint of coquettishness. But I heard that recently, there is an unknown little beggar in the capital. He is so arrogant that every aristocratic family has been challenged by him once. If I meet him during the test, what should I do? You don't have to worry about this. Su Yenemo smiled faintly. Jiaoer, you have to remember you have the gospel of the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. Even the elders of the 4 major families want to protect you. A little beggar, your grandfather will find a way to help you deal with it. When Hellion Jiaoer thought about the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl, there was no joy on her face. Instead, her eyes darkened and she muttered absent-mindedly. But that year, I was not the only one who was divined to be the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. Mother, didn't you see it too? At that time, the divine monk said that both I and that bitch could be the reincarnation. Jiaoer! Su Yenemo suddenly shouted sternly, her face carrying a never-before-seen seriousness. Don't talk about this in the future. Hellion Jiaoer naturally knew that she had said something wrong. In an instant, her beautiful face turned pale and her eyes turned back and forth. Su Yenemo let out a long sigh and reached out to stroke her beloved daughter's long hair. Right now there is only the 2 of us, mother and daughter, so there is nothing to worry about. But who knows when the walls have ears? Jiaoer, remember the divine monk said that the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl is you, and it can only be you. Do you understand? I understand. Hellion Jiaoer lowered her head and was silent for a long time. Su Yenemo looked at the bamboo forest outside the window, her narrowed eyes filled with unpredictable malice. It seemed that that little bastard could not be left alive. Chapter 195. Su Yenemo understood better than anyone that the reason why the Hellion Jiaoer could receive so much protection was because of the rumor that she was the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. Although the War Dragon Empire was ruled by the royal family, there were many things that the royal family had to consider: the feelings of the 4 great clans. This was a phenomenon that had existed since the founding of the War Dragon Empire, and no one could break it. But when the divine monk calculated that the Phoenix Girl was about to descend, the situation changed. The elders of the 4 great clans wanted to use the Phoenix Girl to rule the imperial court, so they let the divine monk continue to calculate where the Phoenix Girl would descend. The divine monk was unwilling. This kind of leaking of heaven's secrets was often exchanged with calamity. No one wanted to die. If the elders hadn't threatened him with the lives of many monks in the temple, the divine monk wouldn't have agreed to continue. Finally, after 3 days and 3 nights, the divine monk finally calculated where the Phoenix Girl would descend, but there were 2 children in that courtyard at that time. The divine monk wasn't sure which child was the Phoenix Girl, so Su Yenemo simply pushed her daughter out and locked up the little vile spawn, not letting her out again. Because of this calculation, the divine monk abruptly aged 10 years, no longer wanting to care about worldly affairs. But Su Yenemo was not at ease. The only person who knew the situation was this divine monk. Getting rid of him would mean that her daughter was the world's first and only Phoenix Girl. Thus she sent out 3 waves of killers, finally forcing the divine monk to jump off the cliff. Now that old bald donkey should have turned into a pile of bones. But now that these 2 children were growing up, it would soon be time to determine who was the Phoenix Girl. Of course, Su Yenemo felt that only her beloved daughter would be the real Phoenix Girl reincarnation. But she couldn't prevent another kind of accident from happening. Because of this kind of framing incident, the retired emperor's mood didn't seem to be very good, so even his previous habits were cancelled. Everyone returned to their own rooms, preparing to rest. Of course, there were still people who didn't forget the main task. At this moment, Abbot Fengzhang was sitting in his meditation room, fiddling with the prayer beads in his hand. The atmosphere was a bit low. The little monk standing outside didn't even dare to enter. Sitting in front of him was Beligaju. His expression was cold and demonic with a hint of evil. That kind of evil aura could not be suppressed even in a Buddhist holy land. On the contrary, it was because of such an environment. It made him look even more handsome, like a demon or an immortal. Head Abbot Fengzhang tilted his head, his gaze looking into the man's eyes. Beligaju, on the other hand, raised his chin slightly, making his gaze appear elegant and indifferent. I know that every time you come to my place you won't say anything, but... Abbot Fengzhang's white finger pointed outside the window. Someone is worried about you. Every year on the surface he comes to pray for blessings, but in reality he is most concerned about you. What do you want me to say? A faint voice resounded in the meditation room where only the 2 of them were present, bringing with it a gradually chilling coldness. Beligaju's slender fingers tapped the handle of the wooden chair. His body leaned back, his long legs crossed. His gaze looked straight at head Abbot Fengzhang. The corners of his lips curved up, making people think of a series of negative words such as arrogance, ridicule, indifference. Head Abbot Fengzhang closed his eyes and sighed, using his fingers to massage his own temples. He dared to bet that this day's bathing, praying to Buddha, meditating and chanting scriptures would all be wasted. Because the person he wanted to cure had absolutely no intention of talking to him at all. These past few years, retired emperor would be like this every year, asking him to counsel the 3rd prince. However, Beligaju was a pool of stagnant water, a gorgeous pool of stagnant water. When he was smiling yet not smiling, that was the time when he had the most offensive power. When he raised his eyes, it was as if he could instantly pry into other people's inner world. Making him chat with this kind of person really made his heart tired. For example, what kind of mood changes have you had recently? Head Abbot Fengzhang was really helpless. You are very clear that you are like a martial cultivator who can explode at any time. You should have recently recovered your martial qi. Don't tell me you don't have anything you want to do? Beligaju smiled. That kind of smile was like a red spider lily that bloomed on the road to hell. It was in full swing. Does killing count? Head Abbot Fengzhang almost spat out the tea he drank. This had to be written down. Because this stinking brat could very well be telling the truth. What the retired emperor was most afraid of was that, apart from killing people, he would not be able to find any other pleasure. Beligaju leaned back and said in a calm and indifferent voice, "You seem to be very excited. Besides killing people, don't you have anything else you want to do?" Head Abbot Fengzhang thought of the main question he wanted to ask this time. For example, you aren't young anymore, right? Have you ever thought of looking for a wonderful marriage? This old monk heard from your imperial grandfather that you chose the eldest daughter of the Hellion family. And looking at her today, I can see that she's actually intelligent. However, haven't you always liked white, clean, and easy to bully little white rabbits? How come your preferences have changed? Head Abbot Feng Zhang actually really wanted to directly ask, are you thinking of using him? Beligaju's mouth slowly draws a curve. Abbot Feng Zhang's scalp goes numb from his smile. Only then did he say in a monotonous voice, what does good prey have to do with what they look like? Prey? Head Abbot Feng Zhang's face was full of question marks, but this was a good sign. It really was a good sign. In the past when they sat together, if he didn't speak, then he would speak venomously. Answering one of his questions so normally like today was really too rare. Head Abbot Feng Zhang wrote at a high speed, almost moved to tears. Obtaining a bit of information about this stinking brat's thoughts was really too difficult. Today this lord's mood is good, I can chat with you a bit more. Chapter 196. In the end, did he fancy a person or a pet and even tie her up? It'd be strange if the other party was willing. Head Abbot Feng Zhang pretended to be serious and coughed twice. It's best if you don't do that. Beligaju slanted his face and looked at Head Abbot Feng Zhang with half-opened eyes. That expression seemed to be asking why. Head Abbot Feng Zhang put down the brush in his hand. First of all, what you fancy is a person, right? Everyone has emotions. Let's put it this way, if someone tied you up, what would you do? You definitely wouldn't be happy. This lord won't be unhappy as long as those people are killed, it's fine. Why would I be unhappy? Beligaju leisurely sipped a mouthful of tea and curved his lips into a half-smile, as if he was talking about a matter that wasn't a big deal. Head Abbot Feng Zhang really wanted to grab him by the collar and roar, do you think everyone in the world is as abnormal as you? However, what you said is right, I can't tie her up. Beligaju wrinkled his long eyebrows as if he had a headache over this issue. Head Abbot Feng Zhang was flabbergasted. Just as he was wondering why this stinking brat suddenly became enlightened, he heard him say again, it's a bit of a pity to break those pair of claws like this. As long as she peacefully stays by this lord's side, this lord doesn't have to tie her up. Cough, that's the reasoning, right? Head Abbot Feng Zhang felt like he was about to be brainwashed. He actually had nothing to say in response to this stinking brat's words. Beligaju glanced at him, the curve of his neck was graceful and perfect, but his tone suddenly became cold. It's a pity that she doesn't know how to live peacefully. Beligaju said the last sentence very heavily. His voice was full of texture, yet it didn't have a trace of warmth. It echoed in the empty room and one only felt like the surrounding air was sucked away by him. Head Abbot Feng Zhang suddenly felt cold all over his body. Then what do you plan to do? Lock her up. Beligaju changed his sitting position, graceful as before. After a few more days she can completely belong to this lord. Hearing this, Head Abbot Feng Zhang opened his eyes wide in shock. You're talking about that eldest miss of the Hellion family? Beligaju faintly hummed in response. Head Abbot Feng Zhang's coughing became even more severe. Mommy, are you choosing a consort? This is simply tormenting people. How in the world did that Hellion family's eldest daughter provoke this king of hell, making him mess with her like this? I don't think that's a good idea. Abbot Feng Zhang drank a mouthful of tea and probingly said, that girl's engagement was broken off before, she's already pitiful enough and now she's being locked up by you. How did she offend you that you have to be like this? Beligaju's fingers stiffened and his thin lips moved. His voice was so soft that it was as if he had never spoken before. She doesn't have me in her eyes. What? Head Abbot Feng Zhang didn't hear clearly. He pricked up his ears and said, if you don't want to say it, then forget it. It's really a sin. Saying this, Head Abbot Feng Zhang put his palms together and chanted Amit Buddha. Beligaju, however, laughed. The corners of his mouth curled into a devilish smile. I've already said that I've had enough. The things I want, if people block, I'll kill them. Buddha, I'll kill Buddha. Do I still lack this one time? If you want to blame someone, blame her for provoking me. After provoking me, she wants to retreat. How could there be such a good thing in this world? You want to destroy her? Head Abbot Feng Zhang's voice also trembled. He didn't know if it was his misperception, but at this moment he unexpectedly saw a demonic nature on Beligaju's body. Only that kind of demonic nature was too perfect. It was like a god standing in the darkness, falling into the chaos of the ninth heaven. It was so demonic that it made people fascinated and timid. Beligaju laughed, endlessly bewitching. No, why would I want to destroy her? This prey that makes my entire body heat up when I hear her name. I only want to press her under my body and fiercely have her. Saying the last two words, Beligaju curved his thin lips. That ascetic face carried a sensual flavor that could practically bewitch all men and women. You're joking, right? Head Abbot Feng Zhang suddenly jumped up. He finally realized that something wasn't right. This was clearly the symptoms of a little boy's first awakening of love, right? But first awakening of love? Head Abbot Feng Zhang glanced at Beligaju again. These four words really weren't suitable for the royal family. Moreover, what kind of awakening of love would open so viciously? What binding awe, locking awe, that was really enough. Beligaju raised his eyebrows again. But she doesn't seem to want me to do that. You have to treat women a bit more gently. After Head Abbot Feng Zhang finished speaking, he felt very helpless. Why did he, a monk, have to discuss this kind of issue with a prince in a temple? Did this stinky brat not have a maid to accompany him to his bed? Were all the hidden guards in the palace all dead? They didn't know to find a woman for his master to properly learn. However, he had always thought that this stinky brat didn't have this kind of requirement. After all, he'd heard that the number of women he'd thrown out of the palace along with their blankets, if there weren't 10, there were at least 9. Every single one was treated like garbage and disposed of. After the retired emperor used this kind of method to send people to this stinky brat's side a few times, he didn't send any more. Because he was afraid that in the future, if this were to spread out, there would be people saying that the third prince couldn't have sex. Head Abbot Feng Zhang let out a long sigh. He'd also seen the way this stinky brat treated women. He was courteous, but he was a bit too indifferent and heartless. He simply had no desires and no demands, even more plain than him, a monk. Now that he thought about it, what no desires and no demands, it was all nonsense. Head Abbot Feng Zhang held his forehead and started to have a headache, thinking whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. The good thing was that this stinky brat finally had some human feelings. The bad thing wasn't his desire to monopolize a bit too strong? Moreover, he was only treating Hellion Vivian as prey. This has nothing to do with being gentle or not. She will resist this highness. Beligaju absent-mindedly interrupted Head Abbot Feng Zhang's contemplation, the light in his eyes deep and long. You've already tried? Head Abbot Feng Zhang's eyes widened into round black grapes. This stinky brat shouldn't have taken advantage of this trip to do something to her, right? Beligaju lazily raised his eyes. What does this have to do with you? No, this old monk is helping you analyze the situation. Head Abbot Feng Zhang had a straight face. Beligaju indifferently stood up. No need. Head Abbot Feng Zhang. How can you talk halfway? This will make people feel stifled to death, okay? Perhaps she's resisting you because she has someone else in her heart? Head Abbot Feng Zhang really thought this way. After all, women would usually keep their chastity for the sake of that cinnabar mole in their heart. In addition, Hellion Vivian had just had her marriage annulled. She still hadn't forgotten Murong Chongfeng and so on. These were all possibilities. Chapter 197. Having heard what was said, Bailey Jiaju's leaving footsteps paused. His eyes that were as dark as the night completely opened. That kind of indifferent feeling accompanied by a smile that was not a smile gradually disappeared from the corners of his mouth. He was currently frowning as if pondering something. When his black hair fell down, it just happened to cover that pair of cold eyes. Demonic coldness and hostility simultaneously spread out from the corners of his eyes. There was also a kind of indescribable emotion, like a sharp thorn that could pierce a person's heart. Abbot Feng Zhang was thinking, that girl who became the object of that stinky brat's imagination is really pitiful. He didn't know that in the instant the wooden door closed, Beligage's hands hidden under his long sleeves clenched bit by bit. A ruthless aura lingered around him, the aura becoming stronger and stronger. The bluestone path under his feet was affected by his ruthless aura, continuously releasing kacha sounds as if it would fall apart in the next moment. He walked step by step into the boundless night. In the long wind, the surname Tang continuously poured into his ears. Following that, he turned around, slowly walking towards the courtyard wing that he originally shouldn't have gone to. It was night, the rain had just stopped. The early summer wind blew through the bamboo forest. Hitting one's face would always make one feel indescribably comfortable. Helene Vivian raised her head as she sat in the wooden tub that was half a person's height, feeling the comfortable gentleness of the water. Normally, Helene Vivian would let Yuan Ming stay in the Xuanhuan space. As for Little White, it was still in the midst of the heavenly tribulation, so Helene Vivian might as well let it sleep. Once this period of time passed, she would wake it up. That way when it came out it wouldn't be struck by lightning. She was the only one in the room. Probably because it was on the mountain, the air was much better at night. The green bamboo forest rustled. The tranquility was long, making Helene Vivian forget that in order to obtain the incense wood, she had knelt down on the 199 steps and received a light injury. That injury wasn't big to begin with, it was just a bit inconvenient to soak in the bath. The injury was on her knee, so when soaking in the water she would feel a bit of pain. Helene Vivian didn't mind. In the past, when she was on a mission, her injuries were much more serious than this. After a bath she would just apply something casually. It was too humid on the mountain and ancient clothes were cumbersome. If it was somewhere else, Helene Vivian could just wear a pair of slim-fit sports shorts. This kind of wound could be cured after a day of drying. Helene Vivian thought as she yawned, holding a glass of sake in her hand. When she was in modern times, her favorite thing to do was to nestle in her 1-meter-wide double bathtub, drinking red wine while taking orders. Sometimes she would even read novels on her tablet. Even in ancient times, this habit still couldn't be changed. However, there was no hope of reading novels on a tablet. Fortunately, the scenery was peaceful. Helene Vivian reached out her hand and was about to put down the wine glass in her palm when she heard a creak. The wooden door that she had locked opened. Helene Vivian was stunned. Her gaze landed on the several green bamboos beside the moon gate swaying gently under the moonlight. The man was standing in the moonlight. He was wearing a flowing cloud-patterned wide-sleeved brocade robe. On the snow-white undershirt, there were vivid and lifelike bamboos as if they were soaked in ink. His long black hair was tied up and scattered on his broad back, making him look like an ancient god. "Your Highness." Behind that man, there seemed to be Shadow's anxious voice. After all, this was Hidden Spirit Temple. The womenfolk and the men lived separately. Like Bailey Jiaju, breaking into the courtyard on the side was already breaking the rules. And Ying was only glad that it was already late and most of the people who were sleeping were already asleep. As for the remaining few, he had the ability to deal with them. Otherwise, if they followed His Highness's actions, they would be invited by the Emperor Emeritus for tea tomorrow. Baligaju acted as if he didn't hear anything. He waved his wide sleeves and that wooden door seemed to have sensed something and closed again, not leaving a single gap. He stood by the wooden tub and looked at her condescendingly. After a while he said, "You want to talk to this Highness about what's going to happen next without wearing anything?" Helene Vivian just remembered that although this tub of hot water was deep and had been sprinkled with rose petals, it wasn't that it wasn't clear. In an instant red clouds spread from her cheeks. Helene Vivian picked up the towel beside her and didn't forget to remind Baligaju, "I'll have to trouble your Highness to turn around." Bailey Jiaju looked at that patch of red as if there were wild weeds growing wildly in his heart, slightly itching. He tightly clasped his fingers. Within his ink-black eyes flashed an unknown light. Once again unhurriedly sized up Wei for a while. Only then did he quite reservedly turn around. Helene Vivian quickly wrapped that long towel around her body and firmly tied a knot. There were no clothes on the side, so if she wanted to wear clothes she had to pass by the man and go to the other side. Helene Vivian thought about it and didn't think there was anything wrong. Since she was wrapped in a towel she might as well just walk barefoot on the wooden floor. When she passed by Baligaju she glanced at his face. His thick eyelashes were slightly closed and there was a strong aura of self-restraint. It seemed that a certain highness didn't have any intention of looking at her, so she could be at ease and boldly go get her clothes. But what she didn't expect was that as soon as she walked over, Baligaju's body moved. It was probably because his eyes were closed and he didn't know which direction she would come from. Moving aside like this, she directly bumped into his arms. The incomparably fresh sandalwood scent instantly entered her nose. It smelled good and noble, very typical. Helene Wei frowned as she watched him slowly open his pair of eyes. Those were a pair of eyes that carried a sense of inquiry, and the shape of those eyes carried a bit of playfulness and mockery. Even so, it didn't conceal the intellectual and aloof temperament that he revealed. "Are you doing this on purpose?" deliberately bumping into this highness's arms. Your Highness, you're really thinking too much. Hellion Vivian laughed evilly and wanted to push him away. Helplessly, the strip of cloth that was tied with the towel fell into the other's palm. That pair of very slender hands in White Academy were holding Taoist scriptures and scrolls. Outside of White Academy, they were holding the universe under the heavens. It was so beautiful that it easily made people think of the white porcelain antiques displayed in museums. This kind of hand was very suitable for holding goblets, but it was more suitable for killing people. But right now, his hand was holding the strip of cloth that she used to tie the towel. This made Hellion Vivian feel that everything was so abnormal. Your Highness, don't you think you should let go of your hand? Hellion Vivian smiled and crossed her arms. I don't think that your Highness came here in the middle of the night just to play with the strip of cloth on my towel. Beligaju made a sound of N, and slowly approached her. With one hand behind her back, the light in his eyes pressed down. Chapter 198. Standing in Hellion Vivian's position, she could only see half of his neck and his smooth jawline. If she got closer, she could see his light-colored thin lips, which looked quite aesthetic and sexy. This kind of man was not only invincible among women, but he would also be popular among men. However, she was the ace agent of the 21st century, and it seemed a bit unreasonable for her to be pressed against the wall like this. Your Highness, I have a bad temper. Hellion Vivian followed his posture and reached out to grab his collar. Her action was cool and she didn't retreat at all. Her thin lips smiled. So, some jokes are better not made. Beligaju looked at her action and smiled playfully. That mocking look seemed to be saying, what are you thinking? Do you think this Highness will touch you? Hellion Vivian shrugged. Some words should be said in advance to be safe. Who knows what this third prince is thinking? Bailey Jiaju slowly straightened his body with an indescribable coldness. He pushed the person away. He leisurely reached out his hand to adjust his collar. His actions were very stylish as he commanded, you can go and put on your clothes. Hellion Vivian didn't relax because of this sentence. Looking at the boudoir that was only covered by an ancient painting, she raised her eyebrows. Your Highness, you don't want to go out? This Highness is right here. You can change. Beligaju casually lay down on the wooden bed. His movements were languid and his expression was indifferent, as if he was the master of this room. Hellion Vivian. How could she change here? And she hadn't slept on that bed herself. Wasn't this a bit too overbearing? Hellion Vivian looked up at the night sky outside. Wasting time would only be a waste of time. Anyway, it was just changing clothes and there was a screen between them. It wasn't a big deal. Moreover, when they really fulfilled the contract, even if they didn't have sex, they would have to sleep in the same room. Getting used to being alone in advance would be helpful for living together in the future. Hellion Vivian had a nimble personality. In the end, she glanced at Beligaju before taking the clothes and walking to the other side of the ancient painting. She first put the clothes in her hand on the wooden rack on the side of the painting, then slowly began to unwrap the towel wrapped around her body. What Hellion Vivian didn't know was that such an ancient painting actually didn't have much of an effect. It even made her movements of putting on clothes more clear. Her exquisite curves were reflected on the painting. Just as Hellion Vivian turned sideways to take the outer garment, she felt as if there was a gaze sliding over her body inch by inch, which made her inexplicably hot. Wei Wei furrowed her eyebrows. Was it an illusion? How could she have this kind of illusion? She shook her head. She didn't think that the third prince would be interested in her. Because when she came out, the man's face was as cold as always. If it wasn't for that silver mask softening his expression a bit, people would feel that he was even more unapproachable. Moreover, his eyes were closed. Hellion Vivian used the towel to dry her long hair. She lazily sat on the wooden chair opposite the bed and was about to speak. Just as she was about to speak, she heard Beligaju's indifferent voice say, "Come here." Hellion Vivian didn't refuse his words. Because there was no point in refusing. They still had a long time to work together. Only what she didn't expect was that as soon as she approached, Beligaju suddenly pulled her over. His slightly cold fingers pressed down on her knees. His voice was cold. What happened? Hellion Vivian was stunned. She didn't think that the third prince would care about her injuries. Although the way he cared was a bit strange. When I was asking for the incense wood, I knelt down too many times. It's abraded. Hellion Vivian didn't want to have such delicate skin, but this body really hadn't suffered much in the past. When she kowtowed to the 80th step, she felt the burning sensation on her knees. At that time she was pressed for time, so she didn't pay much attention to it. Now it seemed that this injury was a bit ugly. No wonder even the third prince frowned in disdain. Baligaju didn't say anything. He pushed her away again, stood up and opened the door. When he came in again, he was holding a box of things that Hellion Vivian had never seen before. But from the smell, it was definitely something good. It was light and cool, and it even had a pleasant smell of plants. Hellion Vivian's nose twitched. Before she could open her mouth to ask, she felt an extremely comfortable force on her knees. Hellion Vivian's fingers stiffened. She looked down at the bottom of her feet. That pair of eyes was still indifferent, without any warmth. His slender fingertips brushed past her legs. It was very cold. Because she was injured in the knee, when he cleaned the wound he had to lower himself than she was sitting. Hellion Vivian saw that even though the other person was looking up, he was still able to achieve the effect of a monarch's aura. She couldn't help but kick her own calf. It was a complete knee-jerk reflex. She almost kicked off that silver mask, but the man grabbed her ankle. Her ankle was very thin. It was white and smooth, as if it would break with a snap. Probably because it was too thin, Baligaju's hand was more than enough to hold it. The man raised his eyebrows. His tone was cold. "Did you do it on purpose?" Hellion Vivian looked up at the sky. "Oh, you seem to be very regretful that you didn't kick this prince's face." When Baligaju's voice was cold, it was really easy to think of a decision-making president sitting in the office. Hellion Vivian cleverly changed the topic. "What did you apply on me?" "Tianshan Snow Lotus." With the royal's temperament, one couldn't expect him to say more than one word when answering a question. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Tianshan Snow Lotus? Shouldn't natural snow lotuses be taken orally? It's just a pill. You can use it however you want." Baligaju gave her something on one side and signaled her to hold it by herself. Then he went to apply the other side. His every move was full of the elegance of a Shangxian. Wei Wei was a bit restless. Snow lotus in the sky, it said that if one ate one, it could boost one's martial chi for 3 years. Quite a few martial artists, in order to be able to obtain it, waited for years at the foot of Great White Mountain, precisely for the sake of waiting for it to bloom once every 10 years. Furthermore, this thing often grew on the precipitous cliffs and precipitous walls, and wasn't that easy to pick. That's why, within the capital, those shops that sold sacred medicines, the price of Tianshan Snow Lotus had always been the most expensive among the most expensive. Not many people were willing to buy it. Even if the Defense Division's residents wanted this thing, they still had to weigh their own expenses. However, Third Prince unexpectedly used it as the most common medicinal paste. The world of capitalists was really not something that human beings could understand. Hellion Vivian finally realized that she was really marrying a tall, rich and handsome man and had reached the peak of life. Chapter 199. Your Highness, it's the middle of the night. Shadow, who was standing outside, softly reminded him. He raised his head and looked at the eastern sky. The masters of Hidden Spirit Temple all woke up early. If they found out that a prince entered a side room in the middle of the night, who knows what the consequences would be. It's very possible that the reputation of the eldest daughter of the Hellion family would be completely ruined. Baligaju naturally knew this. Originally, it was so late today he shouldn't have come to this place. Wrinkling his long eyebrows, Baligaju lazily made an N sound and withdrew his hand. He faced Hellion Vivian and said indifferently, "Tomorrow you go find Eunuch Sunday. He will arrange a new carriage for you." "Not too good." Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed and her thin lips carried a smile. Being taken care of too much is easy to attract jealousy. Baligaju raised his eyes and glanced at her. His voice didn't have the slightest fluctuation. "Eunuch Sun will find a good excuse." "Okay then." In any case, Hellion Vivian also wanted to stay in the carriage a bit more comfortably. Since she didn't need to worry about anything else, there was no reason to refuse to enjoy. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian lazily yawned again and instructed Baligaju, "When you go out, help me close the door. There are many mosquitoes in the bamboo forest." Was this woman ordering His Highness? Shadow listened to the words in the room and silently looked at the sky. When he came back to his senses, Baligaju had already walked out. "Your Highness." Shadow hesitated for a moment. In the end, he didn't report the recent information to his master. He thought to wait and see. Maybe it was a trap. After all, Miss Yun was different from other women. Even Shadow didn't understand why His Highness would choose this young lady of the Hellion family. Could it be that he wanted to divert the attention of the four great clans? If it was like this, then it made sense. Only that young lady of the Hellion family was pitiful. She probably didn't know anything. Shadow looked behind him again and raised his feet to follow Baligaju. The next day the weather was fine and the breeze was gentle. The opening meal was still vegetarian dishes. The vegetable leaves were all from the back of the temple. They were picked and eaten immediately. After a few stir-frying, the aroma would fill the air. It was obvious that the retired emperor was in a good mood today. After breakfast, he didn't ask the students to accompany him. Instead, he went to the backyard of the temple to fulfill his vow. Other than praying for blessings, the most efficacious thing in the hidden spirit temple was praying for marriage. Now that they were already here, there weren't many noble ladies who weren't tempted. However, it wasn't convenient for them to say so directly, so they could only be led by a servant girl, saying that they were going to burn incense. Hellion Vivian didn't want to get involved in this kind of thing. Taking advantage of the fact that there weren't many people around, she grabbed Hiai's sleeve. Hiai's found it strange. Yo, you actually took the initiative to look for me. Put away that creepy tone of yours. Hellion Vivian opened her palm, revealing a string of white Buddhist prayer beads. If a woman wore it, she would definitely look beautiful. You asked me to ask for it. Hiai's eyes lit up. You really did ask for it. Did you think that all your kowtowing was in vain? Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and looked at his appearance. What? You want to give it to that childhood sweetheart of yours to ensure her safety? Hiai's face turned cold. Who would give it to that ungrateful thing? I took it myself to play with. Take a string of female Buddhist prayer beads and play with it. Hellion Vivian laughed. Young Master He really has a special taste. Hiai's didn't get angry and put away the Buddhist prayer beads. It's better than someone offending the third prince who shouldn't be offended. Hellion Vivian stretched her waist as if she didn't hear what he said. Hiai's voice was very light, but it carried a hint of warning. Don't let yourself fall into it. The third prince approached you. This matter isn't that simple. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. The more she listened, the more she felt that Hiai's words were implying something. Young Master He, why are you still here? Eunuch Sun spat at a servant girl and raised his whisk. The retired emperor is looking for you everywhere. Hiai's turned his head and glanced at Eunuch Sunday. He said to Hellion Vivian, then I'll leave first. You take care of yourself. Hellion Vivian faintly made a sound of N. Eunuch Sun, however, took another look at this side. After thinking for a bit, he still walked over and said with a smile, this servant heard that eldest Mrs. Ni was injured. It's time to find a comfortable carriage. This servant has already arranged it. When the retired emperor comes out, a little eunuch will lead eldest miss there. Eldest miss doesn't need to worry about anything else. Thank you for your trouble, Eunuch Sunday, Hellion Vivian said sincerely. She had always treated people this way. She wouldn't treat them differently because of their status. This is what this old servant should do. Eunuch Sun smiled. In the past, he didn't have much thoughts about this young miss from the defense division. He was a eunuch and had seen too many things in the old residence. He also understood why her reputation fell to this point. Even the Murong family wasn't willing to marry her. In general, it was because she didn't have power. A good-for-nothing was a good-for-nothing. She didn't know how to judge the situation and was too naive, so she fell into other people's trap. He didn't understand why his master would choose her. After yesterday's matter, Eunuch Sun really liked Hellion Vivian a little. She was neither servile nor overbearing. She didn't pressure people, but she also didn't shrink back. If His Highness didn't say it, he wouldn't know that the relationship between these two people had already reached this level. If it was someone else, they would have already become spoiled and act like a tyrant. However, along the way, Hellion Vivian didn't deliberately take advantage of His Highness. On the contrary, she was the easiest to serve. Those noble young ladies were also young. They were used to being pampered by their parents at home. When they went out, it was natural for them to order this and that. Obviously, those who could enter the hidden spirit temple weren't too many people. Each young lady and young master could only bring a servant with them. There were many things that they wouldn't show in front of the retired emperor. However, it was different in private. Those few disciples of his were ordered around until they didn't even have the strength to speak. It wasn't that the food wasn't good, it was that the place they lived in was simple and crude. There were even some people who wanted to eat pastries and insisted that the master in the temple make another plate for them. Eunuch's son had had enough. He just waited until they went down the mountain and found an opportunity to beat their parents. It was probably because he had encountered this kind of thing too many times that Eunuch's son found Helene Vivian pleasing to the eye. It wasn't that those noble young ladies didn't have a good heart, it was just that it was very tiring. Helene Vivian was a little different. She spoke very little and generally didn't take the initiative to talk to anyone. It seemed like she was either looking at the scenery or sleeping. However, as long as she opened her mouth, no matter who it was, she was very polite. This kind of politeness was different from the kind of politeness that Eunuch's son had seen before. It wasn't that there weren't ministers fawning over him, it was just that Eunuch's son also knew that those people would turn around and call him a dog servant. However, the feeling that Helene Vivian gave him was different. How to say it? It was as if he was just like her. He was also a person, not a dog servant. With this kind of temperament he would definitely be popular in the palace. Eunuch's son was secretly convinced. His Highness had indeed chosen the right person to enter the palace. Chapter 200. Helene Vivian smiled. When she looked at Eunuch's son, there was a light in her eyes. There's one thing, but I don't know if I should say it or not. Eldest miss, there's no harm in speaking. Eunuch's son was indeed a shrewd person, but his shrewdness made people feel comfortable. Helene Vivian turned the leaf in her hand, her voice indifferent. Eunuch's son's subordinate eunuchs are actually very smart, quite good at arranging things. Eunuch's son didn't think that this sentence was praising them. After staying by his Highness' side for a long time, Eunuch's son also learned to listen. His heart thumped. Eldest miss, what matter are you referring to? When we came to the hidden spirit temple, my carriage was old and had been tampered with. That's why I got on Miss Chen's carriage. After Helene Vivian finished speaking, she added another sentence. The broken tree on the mountain was cut very neatly. It wasn't an accident, it should have been broken by internal energy. When Eunuch's son heard this, he knew what was going on. Retired emperor put him in charge of this trip to the hidden spirit temple. It could be said that all big and small matters passed through his hands. How could there be a problem with the carriage? Clearly, there was someone who received benefits which led to the following matters. In a moment he had to quickly investigate which little bastard under his command had taken something he shouldn't have. It was better to kick him out of the palace as soon as possible so as to avoid future troubles. Thinking of this, Eunuch's son raised his eyes again and hesitantly said, "These matters, why didn't eldest miss mention it yesterday?" Eunuch's son is a member of the royal family, and on the way you didn't step on me. What shouldn't be said I won't say. Helene Vivian only said a few words. This made Eunuch's son's heart tremble. As intelligent as he was, how could he not understand that eldest Miss Helene was taking care of his face? She left him a way out. Otherwise, if yesterday's matter was completely revealed, even if he didn't know, he would still have to suffer a few beatings. Retired emperor's biggest taboo was forming cliques for personal gain. He admitted that he was a bit greedy, but he never thought of betraying his master, and also didn't think about which family he belonged to. It seemed that it was time to change the group of eunuchs under his command. In the future, the situation in the palace would only become more and more severe. It would not be good for His Highness to keep people who were not absolutely loyal. Eunuch's son lowered his eyes and bowed. He sincerely said, "This old servant thanks eldest Mississippi." Helene Vivian smiled. She didn't feel that she had done something very touching. Her style of doing things was indeed very ruthless, but that was towards those who provoked her. For those who didn't provoke her, she would always leave a way out for them. Moreover, the other party was an old man who didn't know anything. There was no need to implicate the innocent. However, Eunuch's son was smart because he knew what his role was. When Helene Vivian told him about this, his first reaction was to inform the Emperor Emeritus. The retired emperor's hand that was holding the Buddhist scripture sank. He sneered, "It seems that these people really think that I'm old and muddle-headed." Eunuch's son lowered his eyes. "It is this old servant's fault. What does this have to do with you? Get up." The Emperor Emeritus folded his sleeves and laughed. "However, that girl is indeed affectionate and righteous. She also has a sense of propriety. In the future, if she is by Aju's side, this emperor will be able to leave with peace of mind." Eunuch's son opened his mouth. He didn't know how to use this topic. He understood His Highness' temperament. He would rather kill 1,000 by mistake than let go of one person. There was no other way. His natural disposition was so cold. He was elegant and proper, but his methods were too ruthless. Just like what the Emperor Emeritus said, he also hoped that there was such a person who could prevent His Highness from creating too many evil creatures after ascending the throne. Let them all come in. The Emperor Emeritus drank the medicine in his hand and put down the Buddhist scripture. His tone was indifferent as he ordered. At this time Hei's had already arrived. The white Buddhist prayer beads hanging on his hand had not been completely put away. It was seen by his sharp-eyed schoolmate. Isn't this the Bodhi seed from the hidden spirit temple? How did Master Hei's get it? That person looked at the white beads in Hei's hand enviously. He wanted to reach out and touch it. Hei's faintly glanced at him. That kind of coldness made that person's movements stiffen. Another young master held a paper fan and lightly waved it. He smiled and said, "Brotherly, I think you're really looking for a beating. That Bodhi seed was given to Master Hei by someone. When we just arrived, didn't you see Master Hei being held back by someone?" Held back by someone? By who? That person doubtfully raised his eyebrows. The young master with the fan chuckled. Who else could it be? It's that young lady from the Hellion family. This Bodhi seed is not easy to get. If you want a bunch, you have to kowtow several dozen times. It's still Master Hei who is charming and makes people admire him so much. A crisp sound rang out. Before he could finish speaking, that young master with the fan was frightened to the point of quivering. The little eunuch serving him almost knelt on the ground. He never thought that he, a royal family member, would unexpectedly spit on the ground when he handed over a cup of tea. Could it be that he didn't hold it steadily just now? That can't be. He even deliberately held it with both hands. Not only did the little eunuch think so much, he frantically wanted to use his sleeve to wipe the tea from Beligaju's hand. However, he was frozen in place by that ice-like gaze. Only what made him puzzled was that the royal family, who had always loved cleanliness, unexpectedly didn't immediately pull out the white handkerchief himself. Instead, he maintained his forward posture. It was unknown what he was thinking, but that expression even seemed a bit absent-minded. When Eunuch's son just came out, he saw this kind of scene. Distressed, he cried out, "Did you get scalded anywhere? Hurry up and scoop some ice for His Highness." Yes. Only then did the little eunuch come back to his senses and hurriedly left. A series of people and horses flipped upside down. Beligaju's gaze never concentrated. Only when it fell on Hei's wrist did it become exceptionally deep and eye-catching. No need. He leisurely brushed off the water droplets on his fingertips, leaving behind a string of obvious red marks on the back of his hand. Hei's raised his eyebrows in his direction. Beligaju didn't even look at him. When he brushed past him, it was an extremely cold temperature. There was no emotion, only a bone-piercing cold. Eunuch's son anxiously followed behind his master, holding the burn ointment in his hand. He already couldn't remember how long it had been since His Highness was injured. It seemed that after that palace fire he hadn't seen any scars on His Highness's body. How could he be scalded by a cup of hot tea today? Eunuch's son regretted that he didn't stand by Beligaju's side to serve him. The young masters didn't take this matter to heart, because they saw that the third prince's expression didn't have a trace of unhappiness. Instead, the curve of his thin lips was deeper than usual. They just thought that Eunuch's son was making a fuss over nothing. But the retired emperor was the retired emperor after all. That was his grandson. Even though it was hard to see through him since he was young, he still knew his temper. He's not happy. Chapter 201. The young masters continued to talk about what they were talking about before. Someone asked, "Brother Hei, how did you get to know that Hellion family's young lady?" Before, she was clearly only interested in the air. How come now she even knows what you like to eat and what you want so clearly? Hei Zhe smiled, the corners of his mouth curved. "What does this have to do with you guys? Do what you should do. Don't touch that pearl of mine, understand?" Understood, we understand very well. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. At this time, Eunuch's son had already changed the teacup and wanted to bring it to his master. Only then did he discover that his palm was tightly holding the remaining brittle pieces, which had already overflowed with many beads of blood. Eunuch's son subconsciously cried out in alarm. He saw that Beligaju seemed to be tired of it. He slightly lifted his sleeve and unhurriedly wiped the dirt from his palm. He casually threw the white handkerchief to the side and also didn't go to that cup of tea in Eunuch Sun's hand. His expression was indifferent, as if the injured person wasn't him. Eunuch Sun also didn't dare to say anything and put that teacup to the side. Listening to the young masters chatting and laughing, his whole body felt uncomfortable. It wasn't because of anything else, but because from the beginning, that smile on the corners of His Highness's mouth hadn't fallen. "Let's go to the front hall and take a look." Retired Emperor's face carried a wise smile as he turned his head and said, "Presumably, you guys also want to know what those girls are wishing for." Many of the young masters from influential families blushed. After all, no matter how mature they were still teenagers. It was impossible to say that they didn't have a girl they liked in their hearts. As they walked, the bamboo forest swayed and a cool breeze blew. They didn't feel the slightest bit hot and were very leisurely and comfortable. Hellion Vivian didn't go in with Hellion Jiaoer and the others to pray for fortune, but she also couldn't delay the journey. She simply sat under the locust tree at the entrance of the hall. Her body was half leaning, and the softest snow petals in the forest swayed. Occasionally 2 pieces fell on the back of her hand. The scene was extremely beautiful. When the young masters walked over, they saw this scene. Their footsteps paused as they were somewhat stunned. Seeing this situation, Hei's was afraid that the retired emperor would blame her, so he reminded her, "Why are you here?" Only then did Hellion Vivian open her eyes. She lazily grunted. When she saw the group of people behind Heizei gradually walking over, she quietly stood up. She was polite and good-looking, but she wasn't close to them. The retired emperor hadn't seen this side yet. He was looking sideways at the flourishing incense burning on the other side. Hei's lowered his eyes. "Follow us in later. If you stay outside and someone sees you, they will accuse you of not following the rules." "All right." Hellion Weiwei yawned, the corners of her eyes were still tired. She raised her head and met with Bailey Jiaju's icy cold gaze. Hellion Vivian didn't know what he was looking at. He just stared at her without blinking, his eyes as deep as a frosty well. Perhaps it had been maintained for too long. Even the young masters of influential families standing at the side quieted down. They looked at Beligaju, then looked at Hellion Vivian. They felt that something was strange. Hellion Vivian also felt her scalp go numb from the man's gaze. She was looking for an opportunity to avert her gaze. She heard the retired emperor laugh. "Isn't this that girl from the Hellion family? What? You're not going to pray for blessings? This humble girl is going." Hellion Vivian bowed as she spoke and was about to leave. The retired emperor was rather open-minded. "All right, you don't need to go by yourself. Come in with us." "Yes." Hellion Vivian didn't care. In any case, she'd go in later. She'd just shake the lot pot twice. She didn't need to pray for blessings or whatever. After the retired emperor finished speaking, he turned his head and led a group of young masters into the hall. Hellion Vivian wanted to follow behind them and hide in peace. Only she didn't expect that Beligaju's footsteps would be so slow. The 2 people walked, one in front, one behind. Beligaju also didn't speak. That cold expression of his seemed as if he didn't recognize her. Hellion Vivian played with the armament component in her hand. She actually didn't care about Beligaju's attitude. Just as she was about to go up the steps, the person in front seemed to have stopped. She suddenly heard him say in a low voice, "You're actually very good to Heizei." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She didn't understand why the 3rd prince would suddenly say such a thing. When her gaze met the man's in midair, she only saw that pair of eyes were so cold that there was almost no warmth. The surrounding air also followed and condensed a few degrees. As his white robe and long sleeves swayed, Hellion Vivian looked at that cold and tall figure from behind. She was slightly perplexed. Eunuch Sun ran over and whispered in her ear, "Eldest miss, please bear with him. His Highness isn't in a good mood today." Hellion Vivian wanted to say that she could tell, but she didn't know why. Eunuch Sun also didn't have time to say more. He followed in 2 or 3 steps. In the hall, one could faintly hear the shaking of the lot pot. One sound after another, very long. The servant girls all held their breaths as they stood, not daring to move carelessly. They were afraid that if they made a sound, they would disturb the peace and quiet and affect their own master's fate. By the time Hellion Vivian and the others walked in, those young ladies had already taken the lot sticks in their hands and were standing to one side. They wanted to say something but hesitated. They wanted their master to interpret their own divinations. When they raised their eyes and saw the retired emperor leading the young masters in, they were first stunned. Then they gripped the wooden lot sticks in their hands. Their faces were dyed crimson. One after another they bowed in salute. The retired emperor waved his sleeve to let them continue. He also brought head abbot Feng Zhang over and let him interpret one of the people's divinations. One must know that it wasn't that easy to interpret a divination at the Hidden Spirit Temple. This temple was famous for only interpreting 3 divinations a day. No matter how much power you had, it was still impossible to do more. But one couldn't help but admit that the divinations at the Hidden Spirit Temple were indeed very effective. There were many high officials and nobles in the capital who spared no effort and traveled for several days just to wait for these 3 divinations in the morning. Therefore, when they heard that the abbot Feng Zhang would be the one to interpret the divinations, each and every one of the young ladies holding the wooden lot looked forward to it. After all, the abbot Feng Zhang didn't easily perform divinations. If they wanted to get 1 or 2 words of advice from him, it would be extremely difficult. Could be said that this time it was really convenient for them. Everyone took out the lot they had drawn. Although they didn't say what they were praying for, everyone knew that 8 or 9 times out of 10, they were praying for marriage. When the Hellion Jiaoer handed over her wooden lot, she turned her small face to look at Beligaju. Her eyes swayed, carrying a bashful expression, but also appearing very well behaved. Naturally, she stood to his left. When the servant girl saw her actions, the light in her eyes carried satisfaction. Her family's young miss was too reserved before. Now she finally knew how to take the initiative. Very good, very good. Some of the young masters also saw this scene. Their eyes flashed with obvious sadness. Hellion Vivian was still standing there, pondering how she had provoked the 3rd imperial prince. Then she heard Hei say, "Woman, you also go draw a lot." Chapter 202. I'm not interested in marriage. Hellion Vivian speaks the truth. Hei Zhe looks at her like he's looking at a monster. An abnormal woman. Hellion Vivian lazily looks at him. Better than someone who doesn't even dare to admit who he likes. Hei Zhe is immediately stuck. Hey, can we still have a pleasant chat? Although their voices are very low, it's hard to avoid attracting the attention of others. Especially since Beligaju hasn't moved his gaze away from the 2 of them from beginning to end. Eunuch Sun looks at the smile on His Highness's face. The more he smiles, the more horrifying it becomes. He bluntly opens his mouth. Miss Vivian should also draw a lot. Perhaps you'll be able to get it. Eunuch Sun didn't expect that his words would attract everyone's gaze to Hellion Vivian. Head Abbot Feng Zhang strokes the white beard on his chin and smiles. This female benefactor should indeed draw a lot. This old monk has stayed in the temple for so many years, but this is the first time I've seen such a good husband's appearance. Her life is full of wisdom, she can turn misfortune into luck. Her eyebrows are full of righteousness, she should be a very rich and noble person. Everyone is astonished by the abbot's words. It must be known that Hellion Vivian has just been driven out of the defense department. Right now her body can be considered to be empty. If it weren't for the fact that she won this time's competition within the academy, how could there be a place for her in this trip to the Hidden Spirit Temple? Why is it that in the abbot's mouth she's a very rich and noble person? However, to be able to make the abbot personally open his mouth to read a person's fortune, there probably aren't many people in the world. Could it be that this Hellion Vivian will be able to make a comeback in the future? The aristocratic young masters all have doubtful gazes. Hellion Jiaoer is so hateful that she crumples her handkerchief, her teeth fiercely biting her thin lips. Her pair of eyes are like poisoned arsenic, but when she lowers her eyes, it's exquisitely concealed. However, at the beginning, head abbot Feng Zhang only became interested in this girl Hellion Vivian after hearing the royal's words. But when he really looked at her, he felt that her appearance was indeed a little different from the rest. He continued, "As for the rest, we will have to wait for the female benefactor to draw the lot." Hellion Vivian calmly accepted the gazes cast from all around. She faced head abbot Feng Zhang and smiled politely. "Many thanks for great master's good intentions. It's Wei Wei who doesn't have Buddhist affinity. I'm used to being carefree and I've always believed in one thing. My life is my own, not up to the heavens." Suddenly there was a momentary pause in the hall. Everyone looked at Hellion Vivian with an indescribable gaze. Only Beligaju seemed to be curling his thin lips as he slowly adjusted his sleeves. Head Abbot Feng Zhang stared blankly for a moment before bursting into loud laughter. That laughter reverberated within the palace hall and didn't fade away for a long time, worthy of being the Hellion family's bloodline. How could a golden carp not be a fish in a pond? Encountering a storm, one will transform into a dragon. Hellion Vivian, the future you truly make this old monk look forward to it. I'll be relying on Abbot Feng Zhang's auspicious words. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. Her indifference to honor and disgrace made retired emperor raise his eyebrows. Head Abbot Feng Zhang glanced at Beligaju, who wasn't too far away. A profound meaning was written all over his face. No wonder this icy fellow took a fancy to this girl. There were many people who believed in Buddhism under the heavens, yet they didn't understand the cause and effect. How could this Hellion Vivian not have Buddhist affinity? Clearly, her heart didn't have any fear. Her comprehension was more thorough than others. She was actually very suitable for this cold and emotionless icy fellow. Retired emperor finally figured it out. Perhaps it was also because of this point. Beligaju actually didn't look at him. His pair of eyes were downcast, making people unable to see any emotion. The Hellion Jiaoer was listening from the side. Her entire heart twisted, but her face was still brimming with a smiling expression. Only, in a place where no one was around, her pair of hands were clenched until they were somewhat deformed. The servant girl didn't know what to say and could only move her hands and feet. She moved the Buddhist lot that belonged to the Hellion Jiaoer to the front. Head Abbot Feng Zhang smiled as he picked up one of the Buddhist lots. In a few words he solved the hexagram. The Hellion Jiaoer's lot was the best lot. It was also the only good lot among the young ladies of the aristocratic families. It attracted everyone's exclamations. The best lot indeed wasn't easy to find. It could be seen how good the Hellion Jiaoer's fate was. Head Abbot Feng Zhang took that lot and solved the hexagram. The first part was actually good, but towards the end it was somewhat vague. But one couldn't help but admit that the Hellion Jiaoer's hexagram was the best out of all of them. The young ladies of the aristocratic families, who previously had thoughts of guarding against the Hellion Jiaoer, once again looked towards this side. Their eyes were filled with envy. The servant girl by the Hellion Jiaoer's side raised her chin very high. As if on purpose, she swept a glance in the direction of the Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian wasn't so idle that she would bicker with a little servant girl. Her eyes stared at the corner of the Buddhist statue and her shapely eyebrows raised. Some people just can't find the best lot. They don't even dare to touch the lot pot. Women, even if they didn't want to admit it, but they really did have the mentality of stepping on the low and bullying the high. They liked to see others make a fool of themselves. When added with jealousy, they couldn't help but want to talk when they met. Hellion Vivian raised the corner of her lips, as if she didn't place this kind of provocation in her eyes at all. The servant girl standing by the Hellion Jiaoer's side also couldn't put up with it. Recently, because of that little slut Hellion Vivian, she had suffered quite a bit of anger. Now, she seized the opportunity and said in a strange tone, "Isn't that so? I'm just afraid that I'll draw the worst lot." When the Hellion Jiaoer heard this, she pretended to reprimand, "Go away. You really don't know the rules more and more." The servant girl shrank her shoulders, but when she saw that there wasn't a trace of displeasure on her Mrs. face, she knew that she had taken this step with Mrs. Hart. "Big sister, you don't need to bicker with these servants," the Hellion Jiaoer gently said. "I thought a lot about yesterday's matter. Mother also taught me that in the future I must love Big Sister. Just now, even the abbot said that Big Sister's fate is extraordinary. If you touch the lot pot and ruin your fate, it won't be good." When Yuan Ming woke up, he just happened to hear this sentence. He smiled wickedly. "Woman, she is provoking you. If I were you, I definitely wouldn't tolerate it. If I were you, I wouldn't come out at this time. This is a Buddhist place." When Hellion Vivian smiled, it was easy to think of the word devil. Yuan Ming coldly snorted. "The reason why this venerable is afraid of these Buddha statues is because this venerable hasn't completely recovered yet. Wait until this venerable recovers. This venerable will crush all of these things. I don't know who it is, but when he just entered the temple, he hid in the Xuanhuan space." Hellion Vivian said indifferently. Yuan Ming curved his thin lips. "Woman, the one that is being looked down upon right now isn't this venerable, it's you." "Looked down upon?" Hellion Wei Wei's beautiful phoenix-shaped eyes looked up and strolled to the front of the pot. She picked up a row of unfolded wooden sticks and put all of them into the pot. The Hellion Jower's red lips were half raised. She was waiting to see Hellion Vivian make a fool of herself. One must know that it wasn't that this little slut had never drawn a lot before. Every time she drew a bad lot, it had never changed even after 10 years. This time just wait for her to lose face. Chapter 203. Well, Hellion Vivian's left hand held the bamboo pot, casually shaking it. Her movements weren't as pious as the other young ladies, but it carried an indescribable handsomeness. Eunuch Sun sighed and muttered in a low voice, "Why doesn't this look like a drawing of lots, but more like shaking a sieve cup?" Hearing this, Bailey Jiaju raised his eyes. A trace of light flashed through his indifferent eyes, faintly discernible. Letting Hellion Vivian fiddle with these bamboo pots and such was really a bit difficult for her. She casually assumed the posture of entering a casino, shaking it a few times. After getting the feeling, she raised her white hand. The wooden lot fell down. The little monk standing at the side presented that wooden lot to Abbot Fengzhang. Abbot Fengzhang looked at that lot and laughed heartily. "Wonderful, wonderful." Retired Emperor made a sound. After receiving that lot, he raised his eyebrows in astonishment. Hellion Jiao realized that something was wrong, suddenly looking towards Hellion Vivian. She saw that she was smiling at her, shaking the bamboo pot in her hand again, with an appearance full of evil aura. But the second lot fell down. This divination was truly perfect. At this time, even the little monk was a bit unsettled after seeing the lot on top. He couldn't help but take another look at Hellion Vivian. Both are the best of the best. Abbot Fengzhang stroked his beard. "This is rare. Both are the best of the best." There was an uproar in the main hall, looking at each other in dismay. When they looked at Hellion Vivian again, there was a faint trace of envy and admiration. The servant girl standing by Hellion Jiao's side was stunned, subconsciously looking at her young lady's face. Sure enough, it was ashen. How could this be? The servant girl's entire body was a bit silly because in the past, they used to mock the eldest young lady about drawing lots. At that time, the eldest young lady would follow the other young ladies to the temple every year. The young ladies loathed her, but she didn't know. When it came to drawing lots, she was more active than anyone else, afraid that others wouldn't know that she admired the heir. What she drew lots for was a predestined marriage. Every time she drew lots, she would lose face, making a lot of jokes. What was wrong with this little bitch today? How could a person's fate be changed? How come she had never heard of such a thing? Hellion Jiao clenched her fists. No matter how unwilling she was, she had to force a smile. Hellion Vivian was straightforward. When she passed by Hellion Jiao, she suddenly leaned over and gently patted the dust off her shoulder. She spoke in a voice that was neither too low nor too loud, as if she didn't care if others heard her. Her voice was clear and long. "Sister, what do you think? Does your face hurt?" Such an inexplicable sentence made the people around him somewhat unable to understand. However, the Hellion Jiao understood. Her little face completely stiffened, and the forced smile disappeared from the corners of her mouth. There was a hint of malevolence in her usually delicate eyes. Hellion Vivian didn't care about her. She returned to her original position. She was still as relaxed and indolent as before. Hellion Jiao twisted a handkerchief. She looked like she couldn't wait to eat Hellion Vivian. Come to think of it, if Hellion Vivian didn't say anything after drawing the best lot, perhaps Hellion Jiao wouldn't feel so shameful. From the beginning, the people who understood could see that this Hellion Jiao clearly wanted to see Hellion Vivian make a fool of herself. In the end, not only did Hellion Vivian not make a fool of herself, she even drew 2 of the best lots in the lot pot. This was even better than Hellion Jiao's divination. Hellion Jiao was originally fuming in her heart, but Hellion Vivian actually asked her if her face hurt. This was the rhythm of angering people to death. When head Abbot Fengzhang saw this scene, he used all his strength to look at Bailey Jiaju. His meaning seemed to be saying, "How come the person you fancy has the same appearance as you? Don't open your mouth, don't open your mouth. Once you open your mouth, you can be choked to death by a living person." Baligaju indifferently looked back at him. "What? You have an opinion?" Head Abbot Fengzhang silently looked at the sky. What opinion could he have? He just wanted to ask him, where did he find such a girl? In this world, it's also very hard to find someone with such a venomous tongue like the royal family. Baligaju didn't look at head Abbot Fengzhang again. His pair of eyes only sunk without the slightest trace of a smile in them. Head Abbot Feng Zhang followed his gaze and saw Hellion Vivian tilting her head to talk to Hazy. No one heard what they were saying. He saw Hazy smile at her with a doting appearance that said he couldn't do anything to her. Head Abbot Feng Zhang heard the small Buddha statue by his hand forcibly crack. He deeply wrinkled his white brows. He seemed to have thought of this matter too simply before. Oh, it's not him. It's them. They've always wanted such a person by His Highness's side, the most suitable person. But they never thought that perhaps that person would be unwilling. But with His Highness's temperament, the things he wants he must obtain. Moreover, he must obtain them completely. In other words, this thing had to be completely clean. It doesn't matter if he's currently treating Hellion Vivian as prey, or if he's only a little bit interested in her. Once Hellion Vivian has a relationship with another man, he's really afraid that His Highness will do something. For example, destroying Hellion Vivian. The more Head Abbot Feng Zhang thought, the more worried he became. He glanced to the side and exchanged a glance with Retired Emperor. Sure enough, Retired Emperor was thinking the same thing as him. That's because one could see the helplessness on his face. Head Abbot Feng Zhang could imagine that if there were no other people around, Retired Emperor would definitely press his forehead. The crucial point is, His Highness never cared about others, even himself. He must obtain what he wants and he doesn't care about the cost. The harder it is to obtain, the more he'll be interested in it. This is what gives Retired Emperor and Head Abbot Feng Zhang a headache. Because according to the current situation, they already can't stop him. Indifference, elegance and grace, these are only his outer clothes. Once this outer layer is removed, he'll bring about a destructive power that no one can estimate. Just like that year's fire, no one knows how many people he's slaughtered. This is also a worry that has been pressing down on Retired Emperor's heart for many years. He and Retired Emperor don't know how he, who hasn't reached adulthood yet, survived that fire. But when they saw a youth who hasn't reached adulthood yet sitting on the throne with an indifferent expression, with countless corpses piled up behind him, other than rejoicing, there's also fear that surges out from their hearts. Since that time, Retired Emperor was worried that His Highness would walk on the path of the devil. Fortunately, when His Highness woke up, he wasn't any different from usual. Only his temperament became more and more indifferent, and his disguise also became more and more flawless. Everyone thought that he was handsome and harmless, but they've never seen his smile that isn't a smile as he raises his hand to kill people. Chapter 204. Wait, what's going on? Yuan Ming, who was originally peacefully staying in the Xuanhuan space, felt as if his blood vessels were being summoned by something. It was surging and almost manifesting his primordial spirit. He forcefully suppressed his demonic nature and coughed heavily. Woman, move closer to the Buddha statue. Hellion Vivian frowned. What's wrong with you? Knowing Yuan Ming for so long, she had never seen him like this. I always feel that something is wrong. Yuan Ming narrowed his eyes. After waiting until Wei Wei shifted her position, that restlessness unexpectedly disappeared. His expression, which was filled with doubt, sank, bringing out a silence that was different from the past. Hellion Wei Wei didn't have the opportunity to ask Yuan Ming again, because when she shifted, she happened to be behind a certain highness. She didn't even lift her head and bumped into that tall and straight, slightly cold back as hard as a rock. She wanted to say sorry, but obviously the people around didn't think it was an accident, and had begun to despise her with the eyes of a love-struck fool. Hellion Vivian simply didn't even say sorry, met the man's indifferent eyes, smiled and wanted to retreat. Unexpectedly, the other side opened his mouth and there was no fluctuation in the tone, and the tone was cold. Don't move anymore. When the young ladies heard this, they looked at each other and more or less understood. His Highness was tired of her. Otherwise, with His Highness's temperament, how could he speak at this time? It was obvious that he saw through her boring tricks and warned her. Hellion Vivian hummed, and there was nothing to care about standing there. The main thing was that Yuan Xiaoming couldn't wake up again. What was going on? Bailey Jiaju looked at the person standing behind him. She had a fierce expression on her face and he didn't know what she was thinking about. He suddenly had an urge to reach out and pinch her. Perhaps he wanted to test how thick her skin was. However, this person was the most pleasing to the eye when she stood behind him. Baligaju hooked up his lips and a smile flashed through his eyes quickly so that no one could catch it. Hellion Vivian was still fantasizing about shaking Yuan Xiaoming, and she didn't notice the attitude of the royal family. The two of them were clearly standing one in front of the other, but they didn't give off a distant feeling. Perhaps it was because Beligaju's face was slightly tilted to the side. When the sun shone down, it seemed to soften the lines of his jawline, and even his thin lips were glowing. Eunuch Sun watched from the side and more or less understood the situation. He stood to the left to make space for the two of them, deliberately separating Hellion Jiaoer from them. Hellion Jiaoer now hated Hellion Vivian so much that her teeth itched, but she couldn't say anything to Eunuch Sunday. She could only stand there awkwardly. It seemed that they were close, but in fact there was a person between them. This made her plan to take the opportunity to get close to Beligaju disappear. Hellion Vivian saw that she couldn't wake Yuan Xiaoming up, so she didn't insist. She just wondered what he said before he fell asleep. When she came back to her senses, she saw that Beligaju was looking at her. Hellion Vivian didn't understand the meaning of the royal family. She raised her eyebrows. "You suddenly bumped into me. Do you think this royal highness can understand that you are throwing yourself at me?" His voice was very low. Hellion Vivian wanted to say that all this was a coincidence, but there was no way to explain why she could bump into the back of the third prince in just 2 steps. She felt that her reputation was ruined by the hands of Yuan Xiaoming, a burden. "Your royal highness, you think too much." Hellion Vivian smiled, bright eyes and white teeth, the taste of sunshine. Bailey Jiaju's eyes turned cold. "Is that so?" "Yes." Hellion Vivian was afraid that he would misunderstand, so she thought for a moment and added, "I really don't have a crush on you." After hearing this, Beligaju suddenly curved his thin lips. That kind of smile was too devilish, so bright that only Hellion Vivian could see it. There were even stubble of ice in his eyes, as bright as gemstones. Inexplicably, Hellion Vivian felt that she had said something wrong. The meaning was very simple. It was to say that the clouds and mist had dispersed, and the sweetness had come after the bitterness. It was even to the extent of showing off one's ability, which was very much in line with Hellion Vivian's situation. The second stick, however, made head abbot Feng Zhang stare blankly, because what was written on it was none other than the sentence he had just said: "Isn't a golden carp a fish in a pond? Encountering wind and cloud, it transforms into a dragon." Although at the beginning he had indeed given Hellion Vivian this kind of evaluation. But generally speaking, when a woman was looking for a stick, it was very rare for her to get this kind of divination. This was simply the best of the best. Head Abbot Feng Zhang had no choice but to start sizing up Hellion Vivian again, more or less having some doubts. According to reason, with the rumor of a genius reincarnated Phoenix Girl, she shouldn't have gotten a better stick than Phoenix Girl. In the end, what had gone wrong here? "Look at Abbot Feng Zhang, what's wrong with him?" A sharp-eyed person saw Head Abbot Feng Zhang's hesitation. The young master fanning himself guessed, could it be that the second stick's words aren't good? Sometimes, even if it was the best stick, it still had to be explained by the words of the two sticks. It wasn't that this kind of situation hadn't been encountered when looking for a stick. For example, the first stick's words were very good, but if the second stick's words just happened to clash with it, then even if the two sticks were the best, the result wouldn't be very good. This was the magic of divination. Therefore, what the second stick's words were was very important to the divination. Everyone observed Head Abbot Feng Zhang's expression and lightly laughed. It seems that someone is going to be happy for nothing. Let's wait until the divination is solved first. When Hellion Jiaoer heard that there was a change in the divination, the smile on her face rose again. She just said, how could an ugly woman who'd run out of luck every time be able to get a better divination than her? However, when Head Abbot Feng Zhang read out the words of the stick word by word, her face instantly sank. This sentence basically didn't need Head Abbot Feng Zhang to explain. Everyone could understand. It was because they understood too well that they looked at Hellion Vivian with disbelieving eyes. Before, when Head Abbot Feng Zhang said it, they didn't completely believe it. After all, a woman who was expelled from her family, no matter what, could she still flip the heavens? Now that they looked at this stick for the first time, they began to look at Hellion Vivian seriously. But they didn't know that it was already too late for them to look at her seriously. Because they wouldn't have thought that the trash that they thought had just climbed out of the quagmire had already become Profound Heaven's boss. Moreover, her martial chi had already reached level 8, far higher than Hellion Jiaoer by several levels. The mysterious expert that made the 4 great clans constantly think about and want to rope in was her. Chapter 205. After praying for marriage, it's time to fulfill the last wish. The imperial family doesn't need to perform a big ceremony like ordinary families to offer incense. Retired emperor only took 3 sticks and bowed towards the main Buddha. He didn't kneel, let alone kowtow. Abbot Fengzhang escorted him all the way down the forest road. Probably because he's still thinking about the wooden lot just now, Abbot Fengzhang's face clearly showed a bit of absent-mindedness. Retired emperor left him behind and let the young ladies of each aristocratic family enter their respective carriages first. What do you think of this, Hellion Vivian? Retired emperor and Abbot Fengzhang walked to the edge of the forest. Looking at that distant figure, they hesitantly opened their mouth. Abbot Fengzhang lowered his eyes respectfully with a bit of worry. This old monk feels that she's a bit similar to that servant girl by His Highness' side. Probably because it's been too long, this old monk can't say for sure. Retired emperor's eyes sank. You're saying that he chose Hellion Vivian because of that servant girl? This old monk can't answer you, retired emperor. Because this old monk isn't His Highness, I can't be sure what His Highness is thinking. Abbot Fengzhang's voice also slowly lowered. Perhaps he's just purely interested. Retired emperor clenched his hands. If Aju doesn't get Hellion Vivian, what will happen to him? Perhaps one day that servant girl comes back. What will happen to Hellion Vivian? He will. I think you know, retired emperor. Regarding that servant girl's existence, it's impossible for His Highness not to be aware. Even if he doesn't know now, someone will think of a way to let him know. When that time comes, this old monk can't predict what kind of situation it will become. Head Abbot Fengzhang paused for a bit, then said again, "Didn't you say that it's very possible that His Highness has already recovered his qi? Since that's the case, I think according to his habits, once he has a proper master, he wouldn't want a substitute. What's more, even now, you and I still haven't figured out what kind of attitude he's holding towards this substitute. Perhaps it's just like what you said at the beginning, that he's only using Wei Wei." When the retired emperor heard this, he pondered for a moment. Then he looked back and said, "Anyone is fine, but only that servant girl. I will never allow her to get close to Aju. She is a disaster to the imperial family. Back then I should have tried my best to kill her. Now everything will be fine." Amitabha. Head Abbot Fengzhang clasped his hands together. He didn't like to talk about killing. The retired emperor steadied his thoughts. When he opened his mouth again, he was as calm and wise as usual. "Then, let him obtain Hellion Vivian for him before he knows that the servant girl has returned." Head Abbot Fengzhang furrowed his brows. Isn't this a bit too unfair to Hellion Vivian? Obviously she was only a substitute. No, perhaps it was more appropriate to say that she was a rake. The retired emperor was still pushing her into the fire pit. The retired emperor didn't speak. Head Abbot Fengzhang knew that this was a decision that he had already made. The imperial family had always been ruthless. Especially those who had reached a high position, even more so. The retired emperor met his line of sight as if he was making a promise. "When the time comes, if she really can't change Aju, I will let her withdraw without a single mistake." Head Abbot Fengzhang was astonished. The retired emperor believes that the Hellion family's girl can change His Highness? Let's take a gamble. The retired emperor looked at the figure not far away. Aju isn't the kind of person who will lose his head for anyone. What those elders thought of may not necessarily be effective on him, but I have to leave him with something to think about. Head Abbot Fengzhang stared blankly. He suddenly felt that his body was somewhat cold. The retired emperor put it nicely as a thought, but in reality, if His Highness always kept that maid's shadow in his heart, then as far as Hellion Vivian was concerned, no matter how well she lived, she was still only a substitute. Even if one day His Highness personally killed that maid, it would still be the same. It was just a pity that such a good stick was lost. According to reason, the person who was able to draw that wooden stick absolutely wouldn't walk this path in the future. Head Abbot Fengzhang lifted his eyes again and looked towards a direction not far away. He only hoped that in this game that unique little girl wouldn't sink too deeply. Amitabha. The retired emperor looked at Head Abbot Fengzhang's appearance of putting his palms together. He extended his hand to let the accompanying eunuchs support him as he walked over. At that moment he felt that he really was old. If he was still young, he definitely wouldn't take advantage of Hellion Vivian, this little girl. The more he looked at her, the more he felt that this girl's character was good, that she was sensible. However, there was no other way. His grandson needed this kind of person by his side. Even if it was a fire pit, he could only push her in. At this time, after coming out of the temple, Yuan Ming was finally able to speak. However, his voice still sounded unusually weak. He lazily nestled in the Xuanhuan space, looking like he didn't plan to come out for the time being. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What happened? I also can't say. Yuan Ming thought about what happened just now. I always felt that at that time, there was a very familiar aura. However, when you bumped into that third prince from behind, that aura disappeared. However, the shaking was too big. You have to give this senior a bit of time to recover his strength. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. What aura? I'm not sure yet. Wait until I'm sure, then I'll tell you. I'm going to sleep first. Yuan Ming waved his hand, directly blocking the mental communication. However, he hid something in his heart. He didn't know if it was his misperception. In that instant, he actually felt that man's aura. How was that possible? That man's primordial spirit had already been destroyed. How could he still be in this world? Must be that he thought too much. Yuan Ming yawned and rubbed the small book cover that Hellion Vivian gave him with a big heart. He began to devour the aura and cultivate. When Hellion Vivian saw him like this, she didn't continue to ask more questions. She wouldn't ask a devil to tell her the truth about everything. Lying was a devil's nature. Since Yuan Ming didn't want to say it, she didn't need to get to the bottom of it. It's just that it was very rare to see him like this. This made Wei Wei somewhat unable to figure out what happened just now. Obviously, the inside of the temple appeared to be harmonious. If one had to say something, it would be that third prince appeared to be somewhat unhappy. Hellion Vivian recalled the scene in the temple just now and slightly frowned. Miss Vivian. Just as she was thinking, she suddenly heard someone calling her. When she turned around, she saw Eunuch Sun standing behind her. There was hesitation on his face. There is one thing that this slave wants to trouble Miss Vivian to help. Hellion Vivian withdrew her hand from opening the carriage curtain. She smiled faintly. What's the matter? His Royal Highness' hand was injured when the retired emperor offered incense. Until now, he hasn't applied medicine. Eunuch Sun said anxiously. When he met Hellion Vivian's eyes, he sighed. His Royal Highness probably forgot, but when he saw the carriage, he gave an order that no one was allowed to approach it. This old slave is worried about His Royal Highness' hands. On such a hot day, will pus form? That voice was very light, but even so, it made the young eunuch so scared that he knelt on the ground in a flash. Royal family, this servant. The young eunuch trembled from head to toe. Baligaju didn't even look at him. This highness actually didn't know. When did Miss Hellion stick to this highness? Could it be that no one told you that this highness doesn't like to be misunderstood? This servant. The young eunuch only felt that he was wronged. He also heard those people say that His Highness loathed this love-struck Hellion Vivian. After all, His Highness had never let any woman receive him like this. But now it seemed that they'd all guessed His Highness's thoughts wrongly. Baligaju's voice didn't have the slightest undulation. Shadow, take him away and cut his tongue. Tell those eunuchs that what they shouldn't say, they should all shut their mouths for this highness. Don't speak carelessly. Yes. Shadow used some strength and lifted the eunuch up. That young eunuch had long since not dared to open his mouth to speak. His lips were pale and colorless, ugly to look at. Those who wanted to harm others didn't have a good end. Hellion Vivian stood to the side and also didn't make a sound. She only calmly watched. She actually didn't think that the royal family would be so angry. But thinking about it carefully, his methods were originally like this. Perhaps it was precisely because of this kind of iron-blooded method that the four great clans wouldn't act blindly without thinking. Come up. The voice inside the carriage sounded again. Although it was still as indifferent as before, it didn't have the baleful aura of a moment ago. Hellion Vivian was still thinking about what happened just now and didn't react. Then she heard Baligaju say another sentence. Could it be that you want this prince to personally go down and carry you up? Hellion Vivian was taken for granted by his kind of reasoning. In addition, his tone didn't carry the slightest bit of emotion, making her somewhat speechless. Let the royal family carry her up the carriage? Even if Eunuch Sun had the heart to help her conceal it, it was estimated that within 2 hours, all the students would know about this news. Because that kind of scene really gave off too strong of a feeling of impulse. Hellion Wei Wei even had some doubts. whether or not she would be shot to death by someone's gaze. Seems that you really want this prince to carry you. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian hurriedly said, You stand there, don't move. I'll go up by myself. Aren't you going to leave? She didn't know if it was her own misconception, but Hellion Vivian always felt that the 3 words royal family carried a bit of loneliness. Hellion Vivian's hand that was lifting the curtain paused for a moment. When she actually entered the carriage, she knew that she was wrong. Her so-called loneliness just now was completely because a certain highness had just woken up, causing his voice to be a bit hoarse. It seemed like he still hadn't woken up from his sleep. His eyes were half closed and his thick eyebrows and dark eyelashes were lowered, reflecting a dark shadow. His ink-like long curly hair draped over his back. Inside he wore a pure white robe. However, the collar of the robe had been pulled open by him. Large roses were embroidered on the luxurious brocade with silver thread. It was extraordinarily exquisite. Even the cuffs of his sleeves were embroidered with half a lotus. His entire person was elegant to the extreme from inside out. This kind of Beligaju lacked the indifferent, holy and noble appearance that he had in front of others. Instead he was more languid and deadly sexy. He was half lying on the fur-covered chaise lounge in the carriage. One of his long legs was half bent. Even when she came in he didn't lift his eyelids. Chapter 207. Hellion Vivian didn't need him to greet her. She rolled up her sleeves and leaned close to look at him. Which hand was it hurt? Beligaju then opened his pair of extremely beautiful eyes and faintly glanced at her. After that he opened up his left hand. Sure enough, there was a wound in the center of his palm and there were even beads of blood on it. If Eunuch Sun knew that one day Beligaju could be so cooperative, his eyeballs would definitely fall out of their sockets. The shadows standing outside the carriage also had the same feeling. At the same time they breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time, they also felt that it was inconceivable. In their memories, when had His Highness ever been this obedient? It seemed like it had never happened before. He wouldn't even let a woman touch his fingers. Even that person in the past was the same. But ever since this Hellion family's young miss appeared, Master's habits became more and more unfathomable. Thinking of this, the shadows couldn't help but look in the direction of the carriage. Their eyes were filled with admiration for Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian didn't know how difficult it was to deal with the royal family normally. Just now, when she was standing in the Buddhist hall, she unexpectedly didn't see the wound on the man's hand at all. It was clear that the royal family wanted to hide something. If he didn't want to, then no one would know. Hellion Vivian looked at that wound. It didn't look like it was caused by a sharp weapon. Rather, it looked like the royal family had crushed something. In the end, who made him so angry? Hellion Vivian swept a glance at the arrangement inside the carriage. She also didn't find any ointment. Instead, there was a handkerchief. However, this kind of wound generally needed to be disinfected. What she was afraid of was that there were some shards stuck inside. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian stood up. She didn't expect that this kind of action would touch the man's reverse scale. It made him ignore the wound on his hand and directly grab her wrist. His eyes as deep as the cold pool of midnight watched Hellion Vivian attentively. His tone was indifferent. Where are you going? The silhouette of the man with a silver mask had an illusory beauty that was otherworldly. Only his pale thin lips gave people a sense of cold asceticism. His pure white clothes had some golden embroidered clouds at this moment, making him look even more noble. Being looked up at by him, Hellion Vivian always felt that in his eyes she was his whole world. It was probably because he was used to being looked down upon by the royal family. Hellion Vivian told herself that, but she still felt that this royal was more likable. At the very least, she didn't have a venomous tongue. Unexpectedly, Beligage's next sentence was, "Do you want to go out now and smash someone to death? It's really rare to bump into someone while walking." Hellion Vivian. Other than attacking her intelligence, would the royal family talk to her about anything else? Suddenly, without any warning, Bailey Jiaju forcefully pulled and pressed her into his embrace. His white robe danced in an arc along with his movement. He pinched her chin and then slowly raised it. His pair of eyes were slightly cold. "In the future, stay further away from Heizei. Do you understand?" "What's wrong with Heizei?" Hellion Vivian frowned. She subconsciously thought that he was thinking about the involvement of the 4 great families. She lowered her eyes and said, "Don't worry, I know what to do. Even if we have a good relationship, There are some things that shouldn't be said, so I won't say it. So shouldn't your highness let go of your hand? Hellion Vivian used her strength and skillfully pressed down on his wrist. She lightly flung it away and then tidied up her clothes. Your highness, in the future just say what you want to say. Don't use your hands. In order to avoid misunderstandings, we have to say this properly. With every sentence she said, the man's ink-black eyes became even more gloomy. By the time she finished her last sentence, those ink-black eyes were already suffused with a faint golden light. Beligaju's gaze very slowly swept over Hellion Vivian's body. After that, he slowly said, "You have a good relationship?" Hellion Vivian didn't understand why he would ask so much about Heizei. He probably didn't want her to be involved with the four great families. After thinking for a while, she said, "We'll talk about him later. Where's the ointment? Where is it? Didn't you put it in the cubicle last time?" "I threw it away." It was still the same indifferent and slightly cold voice. He said it so confidently. At the same time, Wei Wei couldn't be reasoned with, but at the same time she also felt that it was indeed Third Prince's style. Whatever he did, it was always based on his own mood. Wei Wei almost suspected that if he wanted to obtain the throne, wouldn't it also be something that could be easily obtained? Unfortunately, the royal family didn't seem to have a very high interest in the throne. It wasn't enough. He just didn't have an interest. He also wouldn't allow other people to steal the power that belonged to the royal family. That's why the four great families were mentally and physically exhausted when they encountered such a prince. They wanted to rope him in, but they didn't have a way to rope him in. They wanted to deal with him, but they were always miserably dealt with. Hellion Vivian shook her head. She extended her finger and poked his palm. Her attitude was very casual, as if she was talking to a partner that she used to do everything with in the past. "I can't not deal with it. I'll go ask them for the ointment and needles." Beligaju raised his eyebrows and looked at her. He didn't let her get up again. Instead, he ordered outside, "Prepare a new set of the things that this highness just threw away and send them in." His voice was very light. It had a magnetic texture and it couldn't be changed from being cold and luxurious. Hellion Vivian thought in her heart, no wonder all the young ladies in the capital wanted to marry him. This kind of man indeed had the capital to captivate people everywhere. Fortunately, her willpower was relatively strong. Compared to handsome men, she loved money more. The main thing was that a handsome man like the royal family couldn't be bought with money, and it was too dangerous. Therefore, Hellion Vivian could only admire him and didn't have any other thoughts. In less than a minute, the well-trained shadows had prepared a set of all the things that Bailey Jiaju had thrown away in the past according to their original appearance. The carriage also slowly moved forward. When Hellion Vivian took the box of ointment, she smelled it and felt that it was familiar. Her eyebrows raised. "Don't tell me that you just threw a box of Tianshan Snow Lotus." Bailey Jiaju indifferently hummed in agreement. "Hellion Vivian, boss, that's Tianshan Snow Lotus. It wasn't an ordinary flower or plant." "Is there a difference?" Beligaju looked at her. His tone was steady without a trace of fluctuation. Hellion Vivian was speechless. She always felt that she was very wasteful. In the modern era, she spent a lot of money to buy a basement just to put her guns and toys. Now, compared to a certain highness, she was simply a little expert at saving money. Throwing Tianshan Snow Lotus? He might as well throw out a chest of silvers. The more Hellion Wei Wei came into contact with his highness, the more she discovered that her Prince Charming's otherworldly nature was mainly manifested in two aspects. One was his unfathomable thoughts and methods that could change the weather with a flip of his hand. The other was that he really was very rich. "You're so far away from this highness, how are you going to apply the ointment?" Chapter 208. Beligaju's slender and white fingers rested on the short sandalwood table. His emotionless eyes fell on Hellion Vivian's body and his eyebrows raised. Hellion Vivian felt that she was close enough. This carriage was the biggest, but there wasn't much space. If she moved a little closer, the two of them would inevitably have physical contact. It's easy to get hurt if you get closer. Hellion Vivian turned her face to the side and dipped the needle in the ointment ground from the Tianshan Snow Lotus. She didn't raise her head and said, "It's not good to offend His Highness when the time comes." He seemed to look at her and his tone was indifferent. "There's nothing bad about it." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and looked into his eyes. She was still wondering if this man's misophobia had been cured. She heard him slowly open his mouth. "Sooner or later I'll offend you." When he said the word offend, she didn't know if it was intentional or not, but he reached over Hellion Vivian and put down the curtain behind her. His voice was neither light nor heavy as it brushed past Hellion Vivian's ear. When his breath hit her ear, it always made people feel a little numb. Hellion Vivian turned her face to the side and looked at the man's cold eyes. She shifted her position. This man was simply the evildoer of evildoers. If he wanted to bewitch someone in the future, it would be very easy. Hellion Vivian raised her head and smiled. She moved closer and naturally held Beligaju's wrist with one hand. She held the silver needle in the other hand and slowly opened the place where it should be broken into pieces. Her whole person gave people a very comfortable feeling. However, she still felt that the two of them were too close to each other. She didn't know if the royal had any complaints about her touching his hand. The whole time he lowered his eyes to look at her. The sense of presence was too strong, making Hellion Vivian wrinkle her eyebrows several times. However, this didn't affect Hellion Vivian's treatment of the wound. Her hand didn't even tremble. First, she picked the ointment in his palm. Crush the dregs and apply the ointment directly, then tie it up with a white handkerchief. Done. All right. Hellion Vivian stood up. She wanted to stop the carriage so that she could get off. However, Bailey Jiaju instructed the people outside. "Hurry up, go to the front." Hellion Vivian. On the wooden table, the smoke in the mouth of the Chilan incense burner became thinner and thinner. Beligaju opened the lid of the burner and swept a glance at her. "If you go down now, everyone will know that you have boarded my carriage." No, she didn't mean that at all. Fathers found out there would be endless trouble. The thing she was most lazy to deal with was trouble. Hellion Vivian yawned and was a little sleepy. "Then when can I go down?" Beligaju's beautiful eyes narrowed. She didn't like to stay in the same carriage as him. As if inadvertently, Beligaju threw away the lid in his hand and leaned back with a faint smile. "You can also go." If she moved, he would break her pair of claws so that he wouldn't be annoyed by it. Hellion Vivian glanced at him and felt that this person was a little unhappy. She frowned. "Then tell them to stop." Beligaju's fingers, which were hidden under his long sleeves, clenched. He smiled wickedly and said coldly, "Drive faster." Hellion Vivian. Was the royal deliberately making things difficult for her today? Did they have to be so unreasonable? "Perhaps I can stay here for a while before going down?" Chatting until now, Wei Wei had a bit of awareness. Third Prince didn't want other people to know about the relationship between the two of them right now. Beligaju grunted and slightly tilted his head to the left, as if he didn't want Hellion Vivian to see his current mood. Hellion Vivian didn't care where she slept. In any case, as long as she met with Zhe before entering the capital and discussed the matter of the martial chi competition, it would be fine. Thinking like this, she casually found a place to sit down and leaned against the window. She was very self-aware and distanced herself from the third prince. Sensing her thoughts, Beligaju faintly met her gaze. "You seem to be particularly resistant to this, Highness." Hellion Vivian thought she misheard. "No, doesn't your Highness hate being approached?" She was abiding by the rules. Beligaju stared at her. "After the martial chi competition, you and I will be married. There's nothing wrong with getting used to it in advance." Hellion Vivian smiled. "There's no need to get used to it, I'm fine with it." "This Highness can't." Beligaju's voice was very indifferent. "You also know that this Highness hates being approached." Hellion Vivian was choked by his words. Then, Hellion Vivian was still thinking of a way. Don't say this really was a problem. After becoming husband and wife, who would even stand so far away from each other? It was obvious at a glance that it was fake. The royal was very efficient and decisively cut off her excuse. "Come here." "What are you doing?" Hellion Vivian looked at his slender fingers tapping on the wooden table, slightly puzzled. Beligaju looked at her as if he was looking at an idiot. "Getting used to it in advance." "How?" Hellion Vivian's words abruptly stopped, not for any other reason because in the next second she was embraced into a fragrant and floating chest. The slightly cool body temperature with a strong masculine scent made Hellion Vivian's body stiffen. As if he didn't notice her reaction, the royal still had a calm expression, as if holding her in his arms was really just to get used to it in advance. Hellion Vivian felt that this kind of stiff muscles was too uncomfortable, so she simply relaxed her arms with a clear conscience. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Can this be tolerated? It's within the acceptable range." The royal's tone was very light, so light that Hellion Vivian felt that she actually felt guilty. It seemed that she shouldn't have doubted the man's intentions just now. He should really not be used to being close to others. No wonder he would rather have his wound hurt than let the servants bandage it. As soon as she came in, he frowned. He probably didn't like people standing in his territory. She had been in contact with people with mysophobia before. They looked at everyone as germs. It was really difficult for the royal to hold a huge germ like her. Hellion Vivian thought of this and her posture became more relaxed. She lazily yawned and said in a daze, "Then tell me when you can't stand it and I'll push you away." Beligaju reached out and hugged her a little tighter. The softness in his arms made his thin lips curl, and the air of evilness rushed to his face. Oh, she was so easily hooked. It could be seen that this little thing still cared about him. Fire Qilin, who came to watch, silently turned its head. This liar who didn't even blink when he lied was really its master? However, it wasn't wrong to think about it. His Highness' principle of treating his prey was to use all means possible. But when it came to patience, this seemed to be the first time. But it was obvious that Hellion Vivian's attention to other men made His Highness lose this patience. Chapter 209. Why aren't you continuing? Beligaju stopped what he was doing as if he was smiling, but there wasn't the slightest trace of a smile in his eyes. Even though Hellion Vivian felt that she didn't handle this matter properly, but what she had to say she still had to say. "Your Highness, we made a contract. It says that we should help each other, not restrain each other." Beligaju didn't look at her as if he didn't care about what she said, but also as if he was a little absent-minded. He didn't even notice that the hot tea in his hand had spilled out. He only said with a cold voice, "You mean to say that even if you want to see Heizei, I can't do anything about it?" Oh. Hellion Vivian saw that his hot tea was about to stain the wound on his palm. She reached out and held his left hand, moving it to the side, and said again, "I just feel that we can't affect each other's freedom. If your Highness wants to see a woman today and I say that I don't want your Highness to go, your Highness will definitely feel uncomfortable after all, you won't." Without waiting for Hellion Vivian to finish speaking, Beligaju faintly interrupted her and said with a clear and cold tone, "I know who I'm going to marry." In other words, you don't know who you're going to marry. Being said like this by a man, Hellion Vivian actually felt a bit guilty. Logically speaking, it was indeed a taboo for a normal couple. Have you ever thought about what the consequences would be if you lost your reputation before the Marshalchi test? Beligaju's voice didn't seem to have changed, but the clouds outside suddenly thickened by a layer. The originally light breeze suddenly became more than twice as strong, sweeping past her ears, like 10 armies and 10,000 horses trampling on withered leaves. It was a bit scary. The consequences would be that you can't marry into the imperial family for the rest of your life. Hellion Vivian was just about to open her mouth when she heard him continue. "This Highness will not allow anyone to break the contract between you and this Highness. If you insist on seeing him, then this Highness can only take action and help the He family take care of their second young master." Hellion Vivian's eyes darkened. She had never thought that things would develop like this. Only now did she clearly understand what people meant by the royal family's methods. For a long time he had been indifferent, even elegant to the point of indifference. So much so that she forgot how ruthless he was when he hunted her down. As for the royal family, as long as you didn't touch his reverse scale, everything would be fine. If you ruined his plan, he wouldn't mind showing you what he was capable of. It was only because in this game she was just a chess piece, so it was natural for him to care about her reputation. Hellion Vivian smiled and raised her head to reply, "I know." Then she sat back down in her original seat, polite but distant. A cooperation should look like a cooperation. Although the royal family's words were a bit heartless, it was the truth. It was just that Hellion Weiwei had an alarm in her heart. She would never be anyone's chess piece. This game was started by her, so she should be the one to end it. From now on she had to carefully plan how to escape unscathed. Because she realized that the partner she had chosen was really more dangerous than she had imagined. If she wasn't careful, there might be a bottomless abyss in front of her. Hellion Vivian liked to work with this kind of person. That would make everything easier. However, at the same time, Hellion Vivian also knew that she had to be careful in the future. In this game, not only did they have to work together to deal with each other, They also had to maintain their distance. Having encountered such a well-matched opponent, Helian Wei Wei felt that her whole body was filled with vigor. She even thought that in the future, when everything was settled, she would wander to the ends of the world and look for Bailey Jiaju to fight. As for now, it was better to be clear about her position. As for He Eyes, she could only make an appointment at the academy. Baligaju found that he didn't like her obedience at all. That kind of distance that came from her bones was like a wall, forcibly pushing him a meter away. For He Eyes, she was like this. Heh. Good, very good. Baligaju narrowed his eyes, his expression proud and lonely. An ice-cold wind blew across his face. She was just a prey that he liked more. He slowly clenched his hand. Although he was mocking her in his heart, he couldn't help but tighten his grip on the scroll. The atmosphere in the carriage seemed to have frozen. When Eunuch Sun opened the curtain, he saw this scene. He was hesitating whether or not to shrink back. Baligaju raised his eyes to look at him, then lazily leaned back. He casually untied his robe with one hand and casually put the other hand on the side. What is it? Something was wrong. Eunuch Sun understood His Highness. The worse his mood was, the more he would be like this. Strange, according to what they said, His Highness was in a good mood the whole way. He even asked for some tea and snacks, saying that it was for someone to eat. How did it become like this now? Eunuch Sun held the tray in his hands. He thought for a moment and said, Your Highness, do you want to eat this osmanthus cake with tea? Or this old servant will go get some candied fruits for you. No need. Baligaju's deep voice floated over with the sound of rain. No one is eating it anymore. Hearing this, Eunuch Sun felt more and more that something was wrong. He looked at Helian Vivian and gave her a meaningful look. Helian Vivian reached out and brought the wooden tray over. She put it in Baligaju's hand. After thinking for a moment, she said, Eat more, Your Highness' hand will heal faster. The wind outside seemed to be a bit weaker. Bailey Jiaju glanced at her and did not refuse. He only used his eyes to glance at his left hand and then at her face. After serving Baligaju for so many years, Eunuch Sun understood His Highness the most. Seeing this scene, he quickly said, Eldest Miss, it is inconvenient for His Highness to eat with his hand. This old servant's hand is also dirty. I ask the eldest miss to help this old servant persuade His Highness to eat a few more pieces. Without waiting for Helian Vivian to decline, Eunuch Sun retreated from the carriage. Helian Vivian was still a bit hesitant. On the other side, Bailey Jiaju had already clumsily picked up a piece of pastry with his hand wrapped in a white handkerchief. Probably because the pastry touched his wound, his long eyebrows also wrinkled. The crumbs of the pastry scattered on his gown and rolled to the side of her feet. He appeared to be somewhat embarrassed. Helian Vivian didn't think much of it. She directly took the other pieces of pastry from the tray and put them in front of his mouth. Just when Helian Vivian thought that he would dislike her hand, the royal prince opened his mouth. When his thin lips slid across the pastry, he lightly touched her finger. It was a bit cold that was hard to ignore. Helian Vivian couldn't help but take a step back. Looking at Baligaju's slightly puzzled eyebrows, she felt that she was making a fuss over nothing. Chapter 210. His Highness probably didn't bite her finger on purpose. Although this man's mind was very deep, he didn't seem to think too much about the matters between men and women. According to Helian Vivian's experience, she felt that this kind of abstinent Prince Charming usually liked soft little white rabbits because it was more fun to bully them. Helian Vivian wasn't wrong. There were indeed many people who liked that kind of thing. But she had never thought about it. There was a kind of man called Baligaju. He didn't like to bully little white rabbits, but lazy and difficult to tame people like her. The more difficult it was to manipulate, the more Baligaju wanted to break her claws. The wind outside the carriage finally slowed down, and it was very comfortable to blow on the face. Okay, you can eat the rest. It was originally prepared for someone, so Baligaju naturally wouldn't eat too much. What's more, he had never liked to eat these things. Since he had already taken advantage of it, he would stop. The smarter the prey, the more he had to stew the frog in warm water gradually. As for the other obstacles, Baligaju narrowed his eyes and slid the tip of his tongue over his fingertips. If necessary, he would personally take action. Helian Vivian at the side didn't know that Baligaju had this idea, or it could be said that she was a little hungry since just now. She looked at the half-piece of osmanthus cake in her hand, opened her mouth and swallowed it. Her eating posture was elegant, but her small face was still puffed up. The osmanthus cake tasted very good. It wasn't too sweet and it was made with the best honey. When it melted in the mouth, it was so delicious that Hellion Vivian was very satisfied. Beligaju looked at her and was stunned. This highness ate that before. Hellion Vivian puffed up her cheeks and looked up, chewing the osmanthus cake in her mouth. Didn't you say that I should eat the rest? Beligaju looked at her indifferently and seemed to be quite helpless. He supported his forehead with his fingers. I was talking about the food on the plate. Forget it, you continue to eat. For some reason Hellion Vivian felt that the words forget it were an insult to her intelligence. Looking at the small face in front of him, Beligaju's eyes flashed with a smile. He put his finger to his mouth and coughed a few times. Hellion Vivian naturally saw that he was making fun of her, and suddenly felt a little depressed. Thinking about it, she was usually very smart, but why did she always feel that her brain was not enough in front of this man? Go ahead and laugh if you want to. Hellion Wei Wei leaned back and curled her lips. That kind of vexed little action was very small, but it was clearly caught by the black-bellied His Highness. He thought in fact this prey has a weakness. As long as he can hold on, there will be a day when he can directly eat her. He was looking forward to her performance after the wedding. I should be able to use the golden silk prison bed in the palace. She was very suitable to lie on top of it and be slowly invaded by him. That scene would definitely be very beautiful. His prey must be matched with the best things so that he can offend her to his heart's content. Your Highness, the carriage is about to enter the city. Eunuch Sun paid attention to the surroundings. Even if he didn't want to, he had to remind his master through the curtain. In a while, the carriage of the academy students will take a fork in the road and will separate from the carriage entering the city. Do you think it's time for this servant to send eldest young miss back in case there are too many people talking about it? This time Hellion Wei Wei did not wait for Bailey Jiaju to open his mouth. She patted the osmanthus cake off her body and directly lifted the carriage curtain. She smiled faintly and said, Eunuch Sun, please lead the way. I have to go back. Eunuch Sun looked at Beligaju behind her and saw that his master did not smile coldly. Only then did he nod his head and answer frankly, yes. Beligaju indifferently drank a mouthful of tea. After Hellion Vivian left, he glanced at An Ing. An Ing naturally understood his master's meaning. He respectfully lowered his eyes and then swept in the direction of Hellion Vivian. To walk back to his own carriage from the third prince's carriage, there was originally a distance between them. But Eunuch Sun was a shrewd person. Along the way he made arrangements and asked someone to drive Hellion Vivian's carriage in front and behind. This way it was convenient to change. Eunuch Sun lifted the curtain for Hellion Vivian with a smile on his face. This time, it's all thanks to the eldest miss. As servants we are worried about His Highness, but we can't understand his thoughts. We can only rely on the eldest miss's help. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and chuckled. I also can't understand your master's thoughts, but it's right to follow the fur of a tiger. Eunuch Sun suddenly choked. It's not good to compare His Highness to a tiger, right? Hellion Vivian did not look at his reaction and entered the carriage. What's wrong? Beligaju looked at An Ing who came back in less than a quarter of an hour and raised his beautiful eyebrows. Shadow thought about it for a while, but still decided to recite Hellion Wei Wei's words to him. Bailey Jiaju sneered. She's actually smart. So it turned out that she was just coaxing him. He thought that she was being sincere. Such a little thing, she was not afraid of a tiger like him swallowing her. He thought that even she helped him bandage his wound under Eunuch Sun's instructions. His good mood just now had changed and it made his eyes turn even colder. Follow the fur of a tiger? Who was the real prey between the two of them? It seemed that someone still did not know what to do with her claws. Continued to look at her. Beligaju withdrew his gaze. Shadow, however, was somewhat lost in his own thoughts. He'd also thought that if he told that information to His Highness definitely wouldn't spend so much energy on Wei Wei like he did now. To him there should only be that one person who was special. But An Ing could not help but rejoice that there was a person like Hellion Vivian, so His Highness did not have time to listen to other news until now. It's just that Shadow looked at the carriage not too far away and let out a long sigh. If the main character really did come, then Wei Wei to His Highness would only be left as a tool to be used. However, no one cared about those minor details anymore, because returning from the Hidden Spirit Temple meant that the martial chi competition that everyone was looking forward to was about to begin.